Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Russell Rusty and Rebecca Becky Porter. Russell Rusty and his wife, Rebecca Becky Porter, bought a farm in Willard, Missouri, USA, in 1957. At the time, it was a small settlement with a close-knit community where everyone knew one another. The crime rate was low, and life was peaceful, quiet. On April 19, 2011, Rebecca, aged 40, unexpectedly missed her scheduled shift at work. She hadn't mentioned any health issues beforehand, which raised concern among her coworkers and later her supervisors. That morning, the family's neighbor stepped out onto the porch and noticed Rebecca's car still parked outside. Rebecca typically left for work early, as she usually woke up at around 7:30 and left the house by 8 a.m. thinking she might be feeling unwell. The neighbor decided to check on her. However, when he knocked on the door, there was no answer. At first, he assumed she might be resting due to fatigue and didn't think much of it. But as the day went on and the house remained silent, his concern began to grow. Later, Rebecca's daughter, Jessica, arrived at the house, concerned because she hadn't been able to reach her mother by phone. The neighbor informed Jessica about the unusual situation. Together, they knocked on the door, but still, no one answered. When they peered through a window, they saw the house in disarray, leading them to contact the police. Their call followed an earlier one placed by Rebecca's son, who had already reached out to law enforcement after being unable to contact his mother. He expressed his concern and requested a welfare check for the Porter family. When the patrol arrived at the house, they were immediately hit by a strong smell of cleaning products, noticeable even from the porch. The officers inspected the property and peered through the windows. Inside, they found the house in total disarray, particularly in the kitchen and the main bedroom. In the bedroom, the bed was out of order, the mattress tilted, the blanket pulled off, and belongings like a handbag and a mobile phone scattered across the floor. There were clear signs of a struggle, which made the house resemble a crime scene. In the kitchen, they discovered a cut window screen, suggesting it might have been used as the entry point for a burglary. The situation seemed to point to a break-in. However, upon entering the house, the officers uncovered something that didn't support the burglary theory. Surprisingly, many valuable items were untouched despite the chaotic state. Rebecca and Russell were nowhere to be found, fueling suspicions of foul play. The police's findings prompted them to seal off the area and launch an investigation into possible kidnappings. When Rebecca's son arrived at the farm, he assisted the police by providing helpful insights. What deeply concerned him was the presence of his stepfather's medication, which was still at the house. Russell, his stepfather, relied on these pills every day after medical treatment, and Russell would never leave them behind if he left the house. Rebecca's wallet, which she always carried with her, was found in the marital bedroom. Her car remained parked outside the house, and inside the car were her bank cards, with the key left in the ignition. This raised serious concerns, as it was clear something alarming had occurred. Although the house had a strong smell of cleaning products, only one bottle of bleach was found, and it was still full. No empty containers of cleaning products were discovered, yet it was evident they had been used very recently. This seemed suspicious. Someone had likely discarded them after use. It appeared the perpetrator had quickly poured bleach over various areas in an attempt to erase evidence, with pools of bleach still visible in some spots. The police found a computer monitor under the table, but the rest of the system was missing. It appeared to have been disassembled, as some wires were still present. Upon investigation, the police discovered that this computer managed multiple cameras located both inside and outside the house. The theft of the system unit meant all the stored data had also been taken. It was clear the perpetrator had stolen the evidence to prevent it from falling into the detectives' hands. Additionally, it was determined that all the cameras were connected to a single security system. The system had sent out an alarm prior to the incident, but no response was received. Investigators noted the unusually large number of CCTV cameras, which covered the entire property without any blind spots. Such extensive security measures in a quiet, safe neighborhood raised suspicions. Many assumed the system was installed to comfort Rebecca, whose nerves and fearfulness had grown with age. However, the situation was concerning since they lived in an area where residents were familiar with one another and serious crimes had not occurred in years. The police theorized that they might have felt threatened or frightened by someone, possibly an enemy, who acted against them. The stolen cleaning products indicated that the criminal might have been trying to erase evidence of blood, leading investigators to fear the worst. However, Rebecca and Russell's children rejected this idea. They argued their parents had no enemies, were peaceful by nature, and rarely engaged in conflicts, let alone provoke someone to commit a crime. The neighbors were also shocked by the news. The Porters were viewed as deeply religious and upstanding people, attending church every Sunday and frequently participating in neighborhood events. They seemed friendly to everyone. However, people who knew the family better informed police about Russell's troubled past. Before meeting Rebecca, he had struggled with alcohol and substance addiction, which raised the possibility of him relapsing into old habits, accruing debts, or associating with dangerous individuals. However, there were no recent signs of such behavior. Rebecca made great efforts to help Russell overcome his problems and prevent relapse. Many neighbors heard these speculations, and rumors began spreading. Some even believed a Mexican cartel might have been involved in Rebecca and Russell's disappearance. Meanwhile, the police explored different possibilities, such as one spouse harming the other and fleeing or both voluntarily ending their lives together. Bloodstains were discovered in the house despite attempts to clean, reinforcing the police's theory of a violent crime. However, even by the third day of the investigation, there were no concrete leads or evidence. Rebecca and Russell were officially declared missing, and the search efforts intensified. Authorities suspected at least one person had been harmed in the house. Suspicion grew as both spouses had left behind essential personal belongings they used daily, suggesting they might both be victims. Neighbors and friends were left wondering and trying to figure out what had happened to Rebecca and Russell. Everyone was bewildered by their sudden and inexplicable disappearance. As more time passed without any sign of them, anxiety grew among family members and local residents. Disturbing rumors spread throughout the community, creating fear among the public. Approximately 5,000 flyers featuring pictures of Rebecca and Russell were printed. Family members and volunteers distributed them widely, placing them at gas stations, grocery stores, truck stops, and other areas frequented by locals. The local cycling community has joined in a search effort, assisting by interviewing residents for clues to Rebecca and Russell's whereabouts. A reward has been offered, and detectives have been working closely with relatives and friends of the family to gather information about the surroundings, identify possible suspects, such as the kidnapper or killer. They also investigated any recent or past conflicts the Porters might have had with other people. Through this, it was revealed that a family member, Robert Campbell, had been involved in a dispute with Russell. Robert, who drove a pickup truck, lived near the Russells and became the primary suspect in their disappearance. Detectives begin investigating his life and relationships, uncovering a long-standing conflict between him and the Russell family. Their disputes often escalated into heated arguments, and about 3 weeks before Rebecca and Russell vanished, the tension reached a breaking point. Both parties obtained restraining orders against each other. Naturally, detectives approached Robert at his home to question him about the incident leading up to Rebecca and Russell's disappearance. It was revealed that Robert had been claiming ownership of the family farm, even though he had no legal rights to it. Previously, Robert had lived on the property until new owners, Russell, who inherited the farm from his grandfather, and his wife Rebecca, moved in. Robert was upset by this, believing that, as the former owner's son, he was entitled to the property. However, he had been excluded from the will due to strained family relationships. Most of the conflict revolved around the farm. Robert proposed splitting the farm with Russell, but Russell refused and presented the ownership documents. This refusal fueled Robert's resentment. Robert believed his claims were valid because, prior to Russell and Rebecca moving in, he had worked on the house. He had renovated the facade, built a second floor, and invested time, money into improving the property. Nevertheless, when Russell took over, they effectively evicted him and dismissed his investments as irrelevant. Rebecca and Russell explained to Robert that, According to the legal documents, he had no rights to the property. His investments did not entitle him to any portion of the farm. Despite this, Robert felt wronged. He demanded that Rebecca and Russell either vacate the property, share ownership, or at least compensate him for his expenses. Unfortunately, they were unable to reach any form of agreement. The situation escalated, and it was clear that no resolution would come from the Supreme Court. This created an opportunity for Robert to remove both Rebecca and Russell, as well as seize their property. Detectives observed that Robert was behaving very possessively toward the property that originally belonged to Russell's grandparents and had not been passed down to him. He held deep resentment toward the family, particularly Rebecca and Russell. Eventually, due to ongoing conflicts, he moved his new trailer about half a kilometer away from the farmhouse. Robert seemed to have a strong motive for violent actions, including an attack, kidnapping, or even murder, given the long-standing disputes with the family. Although Robert denied any involvement in Rebecca and Russell's disappearance, claimed that he had an alibi, the evidence complicated matters. On the day of the incident, he was reportedly 150 kilometers away in another city on a business trip with his wife. Despite this alibi, police appeared to piece together a narrative suggesting his involvement. Robert, who lived only a few hundred meters away from the Russells, openly expressed interest in their property and became subject to a restraining order. The farm's CCTV cameras were likely installed due to concerns about him. Witnesses confirmed frequent arguments between Robert and the family. On one occasion, he was seen driving by their home, yelling out the window that their time there was limited, perceived by some as a threat. It was plausible that Robert could have hired someone to carry out the crime since he had a clear motive and might have wished to avoid direct involvement. But could he really harm his own relatives and their spouse? As investigations dug deeper, it was revealed that Robert harbored significant resentment toward them as recently as a year before their disappearance. Rebecca had previously been married before meeting Russell. Her first husband, Terrence, was a local church pastor. Their divorce was complex and highly controversial. 4 months after the split, Rebecca met Russell. At that time, Russell was battling an addiction to illegal substances and alcohol. However, after meeting Rebecca, she became a positive influence in his life, like a breath of fresh air. From the very beginning, she seemed determined to help him overcome his struggles. Russell later admitted that her presence gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Rebecca was more than 10 years older than Russell, which initially unsettled his family. However, they eventually accepted the relationship. On the other hand, Rebecca's family reacted much more negatively. Following her divorce, Rebecca lived with her children and parents, but they strongly disapproved of Russell. As a result, her children stayed with their grandparents and distanced themselves from their mother, upset by her decision to pursue a relationship with a much younger man who had serious addiction issues. In fact, they refused to attend Rebecca and Russell's wedding. The ongoing discord between Rebecca and Terrence wasn't unusual and didn't initially seem like a strong motive for the attack. However, the intricate divorce process brought up several questions, especially concerning a restaurant they had opened and co-owned during their marriage. Neither of them wanted to split the business during the divorce, which could have provided a financial motive for Terrence to target her and her new husband, Russell. At this stage of the investigation, detectives had not identified any other potential suspects. The focus shifted to two individuals, Uncle Robert Campbell, who had a strained relationship with Russell, and ex-husband Terrence Fraser, who might have financial grievances against Rebecca. Investigators approached Terrence, a church pastor, to learn more about his recent interactions with Rebecca. Unlike Robert, Terrence appears genuinely distressed from the start and seems deeply saddened by Rebecca's disappearance. His behavior stood in stark contrast to Robert's and showed no signs of recent conflict. Terrence had moved on with his life and appeared content, expressing sincere regret over the disagreements during their divorce. He admitted he could have been kinder at times and acknowledged his past mistakes with genuine remorse. The police continued to stay in contact with Rebecca's and Russell's relatives and friends during the investigation. One of Russell's friends shared some intriguing information. The family's property had been targeted by multiple crimes in the past. This suggested they might have had more enemies than anyone had realized. For instance, a few months before the disappearance, there had been an incident of agricultural theft on their farm. In response, Russell had installed video cameras on the property. Robert was also investigated for possible involvement. However, it was confirmed that he couldn't have committed the crime during that time because he was far from the city. Despite this, his intense dislike for Russell raised suspicions that he might have orchestrated the crime. At the time of the incident, Robert was working as a truck driver and was traveling to Texas. Separately, Terrence was also ruled out as a suspect through further checks. This led to the theory that the Porters might have had other, less obvious enemies unknown to the police. Eventually, the investigation appeared to hit a dead end. About a week after Russell and Rebecca disappeared, an unexpected development occurred. Early one morning, the station received a call reporting that Donald and Helen Willingham had been found stabbed to death in their home. The police immediately noticed several similarities between this case and the Porters. Both homes were broken into without warning, nothing of value was stolen, and the level of brutality was extreme. However, unlike the first incident, the bodies in this case were not removed, nor was there an attempt to clean up the crime scene. The reason? A neighbor had frightened the perpetrator. The witness even chased a man wearing a black hoodie for a short while but failed to catch him. The suspect managed to escape, but the neighbor promptly reported the incident to the police around 5 a.m. The investigation into the second case revealed troubling parallels. The Willingham family bore a striking resemblance to the Porters. Both women, Helen and Rebecca, were actively involved in their local church. Helen was married to Donald, the local church pastor, just as Rebecca had once been. This raised fears of a possible serial killer or a connection between the two families. Despite intense efforts by law enforcement, progress in both investigations was limited. The police thoroughly examined the relatives of the Willingham family, their close acquaintances, and the timeline leading up to the crime. As in the case of the Porter family, several suspects were identified, but each was ruled out after further questioning. Both cases appeared to be at a standstill until July 2011, when the situation took a turn. In that month, a man named Jose Huckleberry was taken into custody at the station, accused of committing a burglary in Greene County. During a 7-hour interrogation, he confessed to killing Donald and Helen but denied having any role in the disappearance of Rebecca and Russell. Eventually, investigators confirmed he could not have been responsible for the Porters' disappearance, as he had a solid alibi. Both the cases of the Porter family and the Willingham family exhibit striking similarities and notable differences, particularly regarding the motives and methods of the murderer. As a result, Jose was removed from the list of suspects in the Porters family case. Later, a police informant who had recently been released from prison claimed to possess valuable information regarding the disappearance of Rebecca and Russell. The informant stated that a prisoner named Tony had boasted during a conversation that he took away the birthdays of Rebecca and Russell, a phrase in criminal slang meaning that he killed them. Although the detectives were skeptical of this claim, they decided it was worth continuing to investigate the lead. The police began investigating Tony. They first reviewed the location data from his mobile phone to determine whether he might have been near the Porters family's residence on the night of their disappearance. In parallel, they delved into Tony's background. The inquiry revealed that he had a history of burglary, primarily targeting electronics and household appliances. Notably, his criminal patterns seemed to align with the theft of items from the Porter family's home, including a computer system unit, potentially linking him to the case. At the time of the investigation, Tony was in jail awaiting charges for another burglary. Detectives arranged to speak with him directly, but Tony denied any involvement in Rebecca and Russell's disappearance. The family recounted Tony's tumultuous past, claiming that he had experienced problems from a young age. He had consistently found himself in trouble and had been connected to the criminal world since his school years. Investigators interviewed Tony's family and uncovered a long-standing conflict among the family members. Some relatives hadn't seen Tony for years and were unaware of his circumstances. Others, like his cousin Dusty Hicks, remained in contact and actively cooperated with the investigation. Eventually, Tony revealed he might have information about a crime involving the Porters. He told the police he could lead them to a location where the Porters' bodies might be hidden, an old hut in the forest. Tony led the police to the site. As they neared the hut, a foul odor grew stronger. Once inside, the smell was overwhelming. In the floorboards, they found a hole concealing a grave filled with garbage and human remains. By this time, 3 months had passed since Rebecca and Russell had gone missing, and the condition of the bodies was severely deteriorated. Identification wasn't immediately possible, and forensic examination was necessary to confirm the victims' identities. Experts have confirmed, through dental records and DNA analysis, that the bodies belonged to Rebecca and Russell. The case was reclassified from a disappearance to a double murder. Investigators concluded that they had been attacked in the head at close range with a weapon. They was found wearing pajamas, suggesting they were likely attacked during the night or early morning while sleeping. It's strange when bodies are found deep in the forest, far from their homes. This area is difficult to access, and for a long time, the question arose, how could a stranger know about this place? The truth was later revealed. Tony's cousin, Dusty Hicks, was an accomplice. Dusty disclosed that Tony was part of a gang, which included several of his childhood friends. They often commit crimes, mainly by breaking into houses and stealing to unlawfully benefit from others' property. Until the Porter family's murders, the gang had no history of violent crimes. Dusty revealed that he, Tony, Wendy Friend, Tony's wife, and their son, Philip, were involved in the massacre. Investigators decided to examine their phone records. Suspicious messages were discovered between Tony, Wendy, Philip, and Dusty. On April 18, 2011, they were near the Porter's family house, but their devices were switched off a few hundred meters away from the farm. The suspects confessed during interrogation that a specific customer had offered them $100,000 to carry out a double murder. Tony, the oldest and most experienced among them, influenced Philip and the others to join the criminal plan, driven by the promise of money. According to their statements, they prepared by wrapping their hands in a special adhesive film to avoid leaving fingerprints. Before heading to the Porter's farm, they bought a can of bleach, which they later used to wipe away evidence at the crime scene. To disable the CCTV system, they cut the wires, triggering an alarm. After cutting through a fence, they entered the house through a window. Tony carried a weapon, while the others assisted him. He went into Rebecca and Russell's bedroom, brandished the weapon at them, who had awakened, and instructed the accomplices to restrain them using plastic ties. They were then abducted and taken away in a pickup truck to an isolated forest area. Rebecca and Russell were left near a cabin in the woods, where their bodies were later discovered. Philip, one of the suspects, disclosed that Tony and Dusty led them deeper into the forest. Approximately 10 minutes later, he heard the sound of weapons exploding, followed a few minutes later by another explosion, signaling the deaths of Rebecca and Russell. Their bodies were buried hastily in a makeshift grave. The perpetrators returned to the Porter's family home to clean up the crime scene and stole a computer containing footage from the CCTV cameras to eliminate incriminating evidence. The police focused on the person who ordered the crime, someone willing to pay $100,000 to kill 2 innocent people. Tony eventually revealed a name, Robert Campbell. It made sense to the investigators, as Robert, Russell's uncle, had more than one motive. He wanted revenge for being evicted, but there was something deeper. Russell and Rebecca knew a terrible secret about him, though the exact details were never revealed. Russell and Rebecca suspected that Robert was involved in illegal activities, specifically selling stolen equipment. They had gathered evidence and were planning to report him to the police. To prevent this, Robert turned to his friend Tony, who organized a group to carry out the murders. The entire gang was eventually arrested. Although Robert denied any involvement, insisting that he hadn't done it, the police dismissed his claims. The prosecutor charged all 5 individuals involved. Tony Friend admitted guilt in 2 counts of first-degree murder and received a life sentence without parole. Dusty Hicks was sentenced to 2 life terms. Wendy Friend also received a life sentence. Philip Friend cooperated with authorities, testifying against the others, which led to a reduced sentence. Robert Campbell went to trial, and despite the evidence being circumstantial, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 life terms without parole. Even Robert's wife, Carolyn, faced potential prosecution for aiding him in committing perjury, but she ended her life before any charges could be filed. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Regina Krieger. Regina Krieger was born on March 3, 1980, to parents Rondo Freeman and Dan Krieger. She was a cheerful girl, had many friends, and a younger brother named Clifton. Regina enjoyed music and water skiing, which led her to join the youth ski club at Lake Myrtle. In addition, she is also a religious person and participating in the youth group at the Lutheran Church. However, as she entered her teenage years, she began to experience unpleasant changes in her life. In June 1994, Regina's parents divorced, and she struggled to cope with their separation. The division of their property created further tension, as they could not come to an agreement. In September of that year, Regina expressed her desire to live with her father, Dan. Though initially her mother opposed this decision, she chose not to make the situation worse and ultimately agreed to let Regina stay with Dan. From December 1994 onwards, Regina lived with her father in a relatively stable environment. However, soon after, she began to exhibit changes in her behavior and lifestyle. In January 1995, Regina, a 9th grade student at Burley High School, started associating with a bad group of peers. Her parents noticed that something was off but found it difficult to get her to talk about it. Their relationship deteriorated, leading Regina to eventually cut ties with this bad company. During this period, she received support from a psychologist who was assisting her in coping with the difficulties related to her parents' divorce. They built a trusting relationship, which became a valuable source of support for her. She confided in the psychologist about her intention to drop out of school due to her poor academic performance and frequent absences. This decision was prompted by a warning letter from the school stating that she would be expelled if her absences continued. However, Regina later chose to focus on her studies and stay in school. On February 27, 1995, she expressed her desire to quit school and start working. The psychologist advocated for her with the school teacher, explaining that she was going through a difficult period. As a result, the teachers allowed her to attend certain classes where exams were held, enabling her to earn the necessary credits and avoid being held back a year. Regina seized this opportunity and planned to continue her education. On the same day, Regina returned home after a tough day at school. She lived with her father and younger brother on the 2nd floor, while Regina's bedroom was in the basement. That evening, the family came together to have dinner, discuss important topics like school, and then they went to bed. Around 11 p.m., that was the last time anyone saw Regina alive. The next morning, February 28, 1995, Regina's younger brother Clifton called out to her since everyone else had already woken up, but she did not respond and seemed to be missing. Then, Clifton went downstairs to Regina's bedroom and discovered blood stains. But she was missing. He quickly reported this to their father, Dan, who came down and confirmed that his son was telling the truth. The bedroom was empty, and there were indeed suspicious blood stains. Dan then called emergency services 911 and reached out to his daughter's relatives and friends, hoping that she had run away to stay with someone. Unfortunately, his hopes were dashed when Regina's close friends denied that they had seen her. The police arrived quickly at the scene, but their investigation was not thorough. They only collected a blood-stained blanket and a martial arts training sword, without examining the area properly. The officers reported no signs of forced entry, which led them to believe that Regina had left home on her own and may have staged an attack. However, Dan rejected this idea, asking why Regina would go to the trouble of faking an attack and leaving behind blood stains. This explanation did not align with his perception of his daughter. Investigators took Dan's concerns seriously. launched an investigation. At that time, there were no advanced methods for analyzing human DNA, and tools like CCTV cameras were not commonly used. This hindered the detectives' ability to gather and assess evidence, which was already scarce. Initially, the focus was on the main suspects, the father and younger brother of Regina, Dan and Clifton. Both underwent polygraph tests and passed without any issues. Despite their cooperation, the father remained a suspect because the police had no other leads to follow. The father and brother stated they were asleep and did not notice anything unusual that night. Regina is presumed missing. There was enough blood in her room to suggest she had suffered a serious injury or had fought back, but not enough to conclude she was dead. It was thought that she might have escaped by hiding from an attacker or could have been kidnapped by someone she knew, as it was assumed she opened the door for the intruder. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain how the criminal entered her room without breaking down the door or windows. A crucial source of information for detectives was Regina's diary, which detailed her life experiences. The entries contained stories about her parents' divorce and the sadness it caused her. Additionally, the police found out that she had a boyfriend named Isidra, whom she had been secretive about with her family. He was identified as a Latino teenager living in Twin Falls and had grandparents in Burley, which is near the Regina family's home. Isidra was said to drive a green pickup truck. The police thoroughly examined these details and started looking for Isidra in hopes of gathering more information about Regina. However, they were unable to locate the truck, his parents, other relatives, or Isidra himself. It was speculated that Regina might have invented the boyfriend as a way to cope with the emotional struggles stemming from her parents' divorce. The Regina family was feeling hopeless and unsure of how to proceed in their search for their missing daughter. They clung to the hope of finding her alive, continuing to seek information and new witnesses. They printed about 30,000 flyers to distribute and post throughout the area. On April 15, 1995, a woman's body was discovered in the Snake River, showing severe signs of decomposition. It was located 15 kilometers from the home of Regina. Forensic experts confirmed that the body belonged to a young girl under 20 years old. By April 17, dental records were used to identify her as Regina Krieger. Tragically, it was determined that she had suffered multiple stab wounds, including a deep throat cut, leading to a violent and painful death. The case was updated from a missing person report to a premeditated murder investigation. News spread quickly throughout the small town, creating fear among the residents, who became more cautious. The thought of a possible serial killer targeting young girls heightened their anxiety, causing people to hesitate leaving their homes and to secure their doors with multiple locks. This was especially worrisome for Regina's father, who was anxious about the safety of his 13-year-old son, Clifton. Despite the community's heightened concern, the investigation made little progress, with the police receiving no valuable leads or tips. Eventually, detectives uncovered new information about the case. They discovered that Regina had associated with the wrong crowd and had met drug dealers, including a man named Gilberto Rodriguez. Authorities believed Regina's murder could be linked to a drug-related debt. At the time, Gilberto was 32 years old, and he often traveled between Burley and Twin Falls to distribute drugs. He was known to be part of a local gang and was considered dangerous. Regina bought expensive substances, making it hard to determine how much she owed, possibly hundreds of dollars, which was too much for a 14-year-old to afford. However, there is no direct evidence that Gilberto was involved in Regina's murder. Later, police received calls from anonymous informants, they claiming the dealer was involved in the girl's murder. But the callers would hang up when asked for details, fearing being identified. No one wanted to get involved with criminals, so the tips lacked specifics, and there is still no evidence against Gilberto. Detectives viewed he as merely a participant in illegal drug activities. However, the communication between Gilberto and Regina, 14 years old, has caused more suspicion. Distributing drugs to such young individuals was a grave accusation. Still, law enforcement needed important evidence to press charges. Investigators continued to examine Regina's friends, eventually they focusing on one individual, Cody, a friend of Regina's. He also bought drugs from Gilberto. On the night of the murder, Cody and Regina were also with the dealer, Gilberto. When questioned, Cody claimed Regina had spent the entire night passed out in the bathtub. However, his testimony was confusing. He appeared very anxious and changed his story multiple times, suggesting he was scared and possibly hiding something. Because of this, the police were doubtful about his statements. As a result, Gilberto continued to be the primary suspect in the case. In 1996, police were actively searching for Gilberto, who had previously been arrested multiple times in 1991 and 1993. Investigators believed he was involved in drug distribution, but they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him and secure a conviction. To catch him, the police devised a plan to set a trap. They arrested a man named Joe, who had previously bought drugs from Gilberto, and offered to overlook some of his past offenses if he would make another purchase from Gilberto. Joe agreed and bought $1,500 worth of drugs, leading to Gilberto's arrest on November 18, 1996. However, the difficulties are just beginning, as he is a cunning drug dealer who does not want to go to jail and intends to fight for his freedom. Rumors circulated about his involvement in serious crimes, including the deaths of Blake Morgan Jr. and Regina Krieger. These cases shared similar characteristics. The young man Blake was killed in his own home while he was sleeping, as attackers entered from the street. Unlike Regina, he was not kidnapped from his home. During the investigation on April 10, 1996, the police identified the criminals involved. They discovered that the deceased, Blake, was associated with pal Cody, a client and associate of Gilberto. The second attacker was Jesus, Blake's half-brother. For Jesus, Gilberto is the ideal role model. He respects Gilberto very much and is always willing to do anything Gilberto asks, completely obeying Gilberto's wishes. As it turns out, the motive for the attack on Blake was unrelated to drugs, as Blake did not use them. Instead, it stemmed from an incident involving Angeli, a girl who was dating a Gilberto at the time. She claimed that Blake had insulted and hit her, prompting Gilberto to seek revenge. This led Jesus to point a 9mm pistol at Blake's head on April 9, 1996, just 2 weeks before Regina's death. The night before, Blake had a chance encounter with a group of troublemakers in a bar. Gilberto immediately informed Jesus that he wanted him to kill Blake, whom he considered an enemy for mistreating Angeli. The criminals, Gilberto and Jesus, planned their attack carefully to avoid detection, choosing not to strike in front of witnesses. Instead, they attempted to break into Blake's house around 2:30 a.m. but left when they found no one inside. This took place the night after their meeting in the bar. They returned around 3:30 a.m. and found Blake asleep. Jesus kicked in the door and murdered Blake by shooting him in the head. It is clear that Gilberto orchestrated these violent crimes, but he remained in the background to avoid being linked to them. Later, all two criminals, includes Gilberto and Jesus, were arrested and charged with first-degree murder for Blake's death. However, at that time, they were not considered suspects in the Regina Krieger case. Detectives did not even attempt to compare this crime to Regina's for a reason that is completely incomprehensible. They ignored the testimony of anonymous witnesses who had contacted police by phone earlier. They also have denied rumors that the two cases are connected. Gilberto, the dangerous dealer, remained in prison while awaiting sentencing. During this time, the Iowa State Department of Control of Controlled Substances was attempting to discover the identities of informants. In prison, there were rumors that Gilberto had already killed 2 informants and planned to eliminate the others. On June 26, 1997, Gilberto was sentenced to 30 years in prison, but he was released after serving just 10 years. For reasons that remain unclear, the police decided to suspend the investigation into Regina's case. For many years, the files containing evidence and testimonies sat untouched in an archive locker. New developments in the investigation were made possible by Gilberto's accomplice, Thompson. Thompson kept his secret for a long time, but it was eventually revealed, allowing the police to find Regina's killer and close this brutal murder case. In 2013, a new investigator took on the case and began by reviewing all the evidence collected by earlier detectives. While examining the crime scene photographs, he noticed a bloody trail that clearly indicated Regina had been dragged up the stairs and taken out to the backyard. It was puzzling how the previous detectives had overlooked this detail. The investigator thoroughly questioned all the witnesses, paying special attention to Thompson, who was serving a life sentence in prison. Thompson, now 31, he had been incarcerated since his teenage years and had a criminal record that included serious offenses like rape, burglary, and escape. He had even attacked the prison warden and killed a fellow inmate. The detective believed without a doubt that these criminals were responsible for Regina's murder, but they remained tight-lipped. Next, investigators reached out to one of Thompson's former cellmates, a long-term inmate who had entered prison in 2009. With nothing to lose, he agreed to cooperate with the police. His information allowed them to reconstruct the incident of the tragic night when Regina, a 14-year-old girl, was brutally killed. On the evening of February 27, 1995, Regina went to bed after 11 p.m., while her family slept, unaware of the impending horror. At that same time, Gilberto and Thompson were aimlessly driving around the neighborhood. When Gilberto remembered he had some unfinished business, he parked their car in the alley next to Regina's house to stop near her home. Thompson waited in the car while Gilberto made his way through the bushes and jumped over a fence. Gilberto entered a house through the back door, and Thompson kept watch from the vehicle. After a while, Gilberto returned and called Thompson to get out of the car. He explained that things had gone horribly wrong and that he needed help. He then went back into the house and emerged carrying a heavy object wrapped in a bloody blanket, which appeared to be a human body. Thompson assisted in loading the girl's body into the trunk, but couldn't get any details from Gilberto about what had happened. The two criminals, Gilberto and Thompson, left, but Gilberto buried the knife he used for the murder nearby. Later, Gilberto and Thompson attended a party where Gilberto casually walked around in a blood-stained t-shirt. Someone at the party might have called the police because of their suspicious behavior. After the party, Gilberto and Thompson went to a friend's house, where they changed clothes and cleaned off the blood. They then drove about 15 kilometers to a bridge over the Snake River. At the bridge, Thompson started to panic, and Gilberto pointed a gun at him, forcing him to throw the body into the river from the bridge. Thompson, scared, obeyed. Thompson returned home and locked himself in his room. He screamed in his sleep and acted very nervously. This made his family feel insecure. He was terrified of Gilberto, who had threatened him, and didn't want to reveal that he had thrown someone off the bridge. He tried to dismiss the incident as a bad dream. Later, at school, Thompson realized that Regina had gone missing from her home and everyone was searching for her. This realization made him panic because he knew he could be considered an accomplice, so he chose to stay silent. He was afraid not only for himself but also for his family, as Gilberto had threatened them too. Eventually, detectives spoke with Thompson, and he confirmed the information his cellmate had shared. Because he cooperated with the police, he was not charged in the Regina Krieger case. However, by that time, he was already serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. On February 20, 2019, Gilberto Rodriguez, a dealer who had been evading authorities, was arrested for the murder of Regina Krieger. Despite the charges, he maintained his innocence. Following his arrest, new witnesses emerged, stating they saw Gilberto at a party on the night of the murder. Some witnesses reported he was wearing bloodied clothes but had no injuries. Others claimed to have seen him burying a knife nearby. Several anonymous individuals also stepped forward, having previously provided tips to the police. In October 2021, 58-year-old Gilberto Rodriguez was found guilty of first-degree murder in the case of Regina Krieger. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It took 26 years to achieve this verdict, which brought relief not only to Regina's family but also to the entire community. Many felt safer knowing that this dangerous criminal would remain behind bars indefinitely. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lauren Burke. Lauren Ashley Burke was born on December 30th, 1989, in Marietta, Georgia. Her parents, James Burke and Vivian Gershon, subsequently divorced. She had a sister named Jacqueline and a brother named Chad. After graduating from high school, Lauren attended Auburn University, where she studied graphic design, participated actively in the Delta Gamma sorority, played lacrosse, and engaged with the campus community. Lauren was described by her friends as a friendly and outstanding student, always smiling, happy, and eager to help. While in high school, she began dating a boy named Sean. After graduating, they both attended Auburn University, where they maintained their relationship. At this stage in their lives, education was a top priority for both. However, they also actively made future plans together. Sadly, not all of Lauren's dreams and aspirations were meant to be realized. On the morning of March 4, 2008, Lauren had breakfast at a cafe with her boyfriend, Sean. At 11 a.m., she attended class and then called her father, James, to talk about spring break plans and a dental visit. After her conversation with her father, she went to Sean's dorm and spent time there until the evening. She had a study appointment at 8:30 p.m. with her classmate, Michael, in the library. When Lauren left Sean's room around 8 p.m., it was already dark outside. She walked to her 2001 Honda Civic, which was parked in the lot beside the dorm. This was the last time Sean saw Lauren. Michael was supposed to meet Lauren at the library, but when she didn't show up, he began calling her cell phone repeatedly. After several calls, Lauren finally answered and informed him that she wouldn't be coming to the library because she had forgotten their appointment. She hung up shortly afterward. Later, around 9 p.m., 911 received a report about an injured girl lying on the road between Farmville Baptist Church and Route 280 on the 147 freeway. The girl was Lauren. Drivers stopped their cars, causing traffic to back up in both directions. Lauren was on her back in the middle of the road, struggling to breathe. She had multiple injuries and was only wearing socks. At 9:12 p.m., the first police car arrived at the scene, where Lauren was unconscious. A few minutes later, paramedics arrived and found her pulse barely detectable as they loaded her into the ambulance. By 9:35 p.m., Lauren was at East Alabama Medical Center, where doctors began attempts to save her life. Earlier, at 9:27 p.m., 911 dispatchers had received several reports of a car fire on the Auburn University campus, prompting an immediate response from firefighters and police. However, amidst a crowd of curious students gathered near the burning car, police could not locate the car owner. They checked the license plates and identified the car's owner as James Burke. James Burke is the father of Lauren. The police contacted him by phone to inform him that the Honda involved in a fire belonged to his daughter. Concerned, James immediately asked about her condition, but the police had no information. They did not know where Lauren was and confirmed that she was not in the burning car. After speaking with the officer, James tried calling Lauren's cell phone, but she didn't answer, increasing his worry. Unable to get in touch with her, he first called her friends, but none could provide any details about her location or the incident. Next, he reached out to his ex-wife hoping she might have some information, but she was also unaware of what had happened. At 9:40 p.m., Vivian called her daughter's boyfriend, Sean, to inform him that Lauren was missing and her car had been burned. Concerned, Sean reached out to mutual friends to see if anyone had seen Lauren that evening. He discovered that she had canceled a meeting at the library, claiming she had forgotten about it. However, Sean knew that Lauren had not forgotten, as she had planned to go directly to the library after leaving his place about 2 hours earlier. While family and friends were trying to locate Lauren, doctors at East Alabama Medical Center were working hard to save her life. They didn't know her name since she was brought in unconscious and without any personal belongings or identification. Sadly, despite the doctors' best efforts, they could not save Lauren's life, and she was pronounced dead about an hour after arriving at the hospital. The cause of death was a single bullet wound that had penetrated both of her lungs. Experts determined that the gun was fired from just a few inches away from her skin. Police officers, while investigating the connection between Lauren's death and a burned-out car on campus belonging to a missing person, quickly identified the victim as Lauren Burke. The day after her death, on March 5, 2008, James traveled from Atlanta to identify his daughter's body. The news of Lauren's death rapidly circulated throughout the campus. Auburn University issued a statement regarding Lauren's passing, advising students and staff to be more vigilant both on and off campus, while also reassuring them that the campus remains safe. The statement emphasized, "Many of you and your parents have called and are understandably concerned. There is no indication of any additional danger to campus or student safety." Auburn Police spokesman Captain Tom Stouffer stated, "We are dedicating all our resources to finding the person responsible for this crime." Auburn, Alabama is a peaceful community for students, and incidents like this affect us deeply. When someone is harmed or loses their life, it impacts us all. We will not stop until we identify the perpetrator. He also mentioned that Alabama Governor Bob Riley has announced a $10,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in Lauren's case. Lauren's burned car was transported to the Auburn Police Department, where investigators from the State Forensic Laboratory and officers from the State Fire Chief's office examined the charred interior. They discovered pieces of burned clothing, Lauren's melted digital camera, and the car owner's manual. A .38 caliber bullet was found under the front seat, suggesting that the car's interior may have been the crime scene and that the arsonist intended to destroy evidence by setting it on fire. Detectives interviewed Lauren's family, friends, and boyfriend, but none could identify anyone who wanted to harm her or had the motive to do so. Investigators searched Sean's dorm room, where Lauren had been before her death, but found no evidence linking him to the crime. After talking to Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library, detectives learned that when Lauren answered his call, he heard a sound that resembled a moving car. Additionally, it was discovered that someone had used Lauren's bank card multiple times shortly after she was found on the road. This suggested that the person who used her bank card might be connected to her incident, prompting the police to start searching for him. Less than 3 days after Lauren's passing, an unexpected event occurred. On March 7, 2008, at 9:55 a.m., a man of African descent assaulted a 72-year-old woman in the parking lot of a Walmart in Newnan, Georgia, about 75 miles from Auburn. As she was getting into her car, he struck her on the head, threatened her, and ordered her to enter the passenger seat. After getting into the driver's seat, he attempted to flee the parking lot but realized that an eyewitness was following him while on the phone. The thought that the eyewitness might call the police made the man return to the Walmart parking lot. He parked the stolen vehicle, got out, ran to a nearby Chrysler Sebring, entered it, and quickly drove away. A few hours later, for officers pursued the fleeing Chrysler at high speed towards Columbus, West Georgia. The driver ignored all attempts to stop, putting other road users at risk. During the pursuit, police saw the driver throw something out of the window. One of the police teams stopped to search for the object and found a .38 caliber revolver on the side of the road. The chase continued until high vehicle broke down, causing smoke to pour from the hood. The driver suddenly stopped in the road and opened the door. A police officer on a motorcycle, chasing the suspect, collided with the open door. The impact caused the officer to be thrown over the handlebars and onto the pavement, but he was fortunately not seriously injured. The suspect then ran into the nearby woods in an attempt to escape. However, the police quickly apprehended him and placed handcuffs on his wrists. He was Courtney Lockhart, born on October 20, 1984. His family remembers him as a friendly and fun-loving person until he joined the U.S. Army. He was deployed to Iraq in 2004 and returned in 2005, but he came back a changed man. His mother observed that he was no longer the Courtney she once knew. She noted that he had been cheerful before his deployment, but after returning from Iraq, he never smiled again. He became very cautious about his surroundings and sometimes even hid in the closet or under the bed. In 2006, Courtney and his girlfriend, who had already broken up, welcomed a daughter. That same year, he faced a court-martial for assaulting fellow soldiers, using illegal drugs, and deserting his unit without permission. He spent 7 months in detention and was dishonorably discharged from the Army in December 2006. As 2008 neared, Courtney's behavior deteriorated significantly. He rarely showered, stopped seeing his daughter, and became severely addicted to illegal drugs. In February 2008, he began a series of burglaries. Aside from one robbery at a convenience store, his approach was consistent. He would approach women from behind as they were getting into their cars in parking lots, threaten them with a gun, demand their purses, and try to steal their cars. One of these attacks led to the death of Lauren. Courtney's crime spree ended on March 7, 2008, when he attacked a 72-year-old woman and could not escape from the police. After his arrest, 23-year-old Courtney was brought to the police station, where he confessed to kidnapping and killing Lauren. The interrogation was videotaped and served as crucial evidence during the trial. Furthermore, Lauren's personal items, including her iPod and bank cards, were discovered in his car. Courtney provided a detailed description of the events from the day he kidnapped Lauren, which took place on Tuesday, March 4, 2008. Courtney woke up in his Chrysler Sebring after spending the night in his car near East Alabama Medical Center. He was in need of money, so he drove around Auburn searching for a potential target. It's important to mention that all his victims were women. He never targeted men. His drive took him to Auburn University, where he parked near the student dormitories. He spent several hours in his car observing the students. Around 8 p.m., he saw a girl walk up to the car next to him and casually open the door. It was Lauren. Without thinking much, Courtney grabbed his revolver and approached Lauren from behind, pressing the gun against her. He asked her how much money she had. When she didn't respond, he forced her into the front passenger seat of the car and took the driver's seat. Courtney claimed that Lauren didn't speak but screamed in fear. Once she calmed down, she took out $200 from her purse, gave it to him, and pleaded with him to let her go. Instead of leaving, he ordered Lauren to undress at gunpoint. Fearing for her safety, Lauren complied, removing all her clothing except for a pair of socks. Courtney believed that by making her undress, she would be less likely to try to escape. He then drove around Auburn, controlling the car with one hand while aiming the gun at Lauren with the other. As she tried to convince him not to go through with his plan, he lamented that his life was over. In response, Lauren promised to help him find a job. At one point, Lauren's phone rang. Courtney urged her to answer it and come up with a believable excuse. It was Michael calling, who was waiting for Lauren at the library. When she picked up the phone, she quickly said she had forgotten about the meeting and hung up. Courtney mentioned that they continued driving through the city, while Lauren persistently tried to persuade him to let her go, insisting that she could help him through his troubles. While driving on Highway 147, Lauren suddenly opened the door and attempted to jump out of the moving car. At that moment, Courtney accidentally fired a shot. The bullet struck both of Lauren's lungs, and she also suffered injuries from the fall. Despite her injuries, she was able to wave to passing drivers until she eventually lost consciousness. Courtney told investigators that he parked near the church and observed as cars began to stop next to Lauren on the pavement. Realizing that the police would arrive soon, he quickly fled, intending to destroy any evidence left in the car. Investigators began to question the truthfulness of Courtney's testimony. They suspected that Courtney had made Lauren undress, not to prevent her from escaping as he claimed, but for another reason altogether. However, Lauren managed to jump out of the moving car, foiling Courtney's intentions. The investigators also questioned whether Courtney had accidentally shot Lauren, as it seemed unlikely. He had served in the army and was familiar with firearms. It appeared more plausible that Lauren recognized Courtney wouldn't let her go and believed her only chance for escape was to jump out. As she opened the door and jumped out of the car, Courtney deliberately shot her. Ballistics testing confirmed that the bullet found in Lauren's car was fired from the gun that Courtney had discarded while fleeing from the police. Experts conducted tests and determined that the gun could not have discharged accidentally. The trigger needed to be pulled firmly to fire a shot. Lauren's family and friends held a farewell for her on March 9th, the same day investigators questioned Courtney for the second time. The following day, he was officially charged multiple times in connection with the Lauren Burke case. The trial commenced on November 8, 2010. Courtney's lawyers argued that their client suffered from a mental illness linked to his military service and that the shooting of Lauren was unintentional. Court records show that Courtney pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect or insanity. A psychologist testified in court, stating that Courtney had an IQ of 86, which is below average, and exhibited some symptoms from his combat experience, although he did not have PTSD. The psychologist also described Courtney as immature and lacking clear judgment. The state tried to present evidence about Courtney's other crimes and his misconduct in the military, but the trial judge did not allow it. After the trial's guilt phase, the sentencing phase began right away. Courtney brought in witnesses and evidence to portray himself as a war hero who was mentally affected by combat and the death of his commanding officer. The jury reached a special verdict, noting that an additional aggravating factor was that a life was taken during the kidnapping. The jury unanimously recommended a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. However, the trial judge ultimately rejected the jury's recommendation for a lesser sentence and sentenced Courtney to death. In a detailed 28-page order, the judge outlined his reasons for this decision. He emphasized that the severity of the kidnapping made the death penalty justified. The victim, who was unarmed and chosen at random, was alone when she was abducted. The judge pointed out that the crime was particularly horrifying because it occurred on a college campus, a setting where students expect to feel safe. Courtney not only forced the victim into her own car but also made her undress and threatened her with a gun to prevent her from escaping. The court highlighted that the jury did not know about Courtney's criminal activities or the real details of their military service. While the jury received some information about Courtney's service, they were not informed about the complete disciplinary history. The judge noted that if the jury had been aware of this additional information, their recommendation for sentencing would probably have been different. 15 years have passed since Lauren's death, and Courtney remains was on death row in Alabama, continuing his efforts to appeal his sentence. After being convicted and sentenced to death, he first appealed to an Alabama court, which upheld his sentence in August 2013. In April 2014, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals rejected Courtney's request for a retrial. He subsequently appealed to the Supreme Court of Alabama, but his motion was denied again in September 2014. In January 2015, Courtney appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States, but in April 2015, his petition was also denied. In 2018, Courtney attempted once more to contest his sentence. Lawyers from a human rights organization, representing him, argued that the attorneys who defended Courtney in 2010 had mishandled his case. Although there were some issues with Courtney's defense in 2010, these issues did not affect the final decision and his death sentence was upheld. In April 2021, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals confirmed Courtney's death sentence. Lauren's parents are determined to prevent the overturning of Courtney Lockhart's death sentence. Jim, Lauren's father, stated, "Courtney Lockhart was responsible for my daughter's death. He deserves the death penalty." Vivian, Lauren's mother, added, "He didn't give her a second chance, so he shouldn't be given one either." Currently, Courtney Lockhart is still on death row in Alabama. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rachel Anderson. Rachel Anderson is a 24-year-old female born on January 28, 1994, in Warren, Ohio, to William Bill Anderson and Patricia Trish Anderson. She has a younger brother named John, who was favored by the family. Rachel graduated from Warren Harding High School in 2012, where she was a member of the National Honor Society and played on the soccer and volleyball teams. From a young age, Rachel aspired to become a funeral director, a unique career choice. She moved on to Youngstown State University, focusing on the study of deceased individuals. Her dedication to her studies earned her recognition as one of the top students, along with a scholarship. Following this, she attended the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science, graduating in 2016 with a Bachelor of Science degree in Mortuary Science. After joining the Ohio Funeral Directors Association, Rachel relocated to Columbus to start her internship at Shaw Davis Funeral Home. She took her role seriously, believing it was her responsibility to help the families of the deceased. As her internship was nearing its conclusion, Rachel hoped to become a permanent employee at the funeral home. However, her dream was suddenly and tragically shattered. Rachel's body was taken to the morgue, and investigators began interviewing the first witnesses. The autopsy on Rachel revealed the details of the brutal assault she suffered that night. She had been both strangled and stabbed. Specifically, she had a cut on her scalp and fractures at the base of her skull. The stab wound entered through the back of her neck and penetrated the left side of her brain, indicating extreme force that caused a portion of her skull to break off. The autopsy also found that she had been strangled with a cord from an electric blanket. The strangulation caused bleeding in her sternoclavicular muscles and eyelids, and the blood vessels in her eyes had burst, leading to noticeable redness. Forensic evidence revealed bruises and red marks on her ankles and wrists, indicating she was alive when the perpetrator tied her up. A DNA sample was discovered on the rope and Rachel's body. The coroner who conducted Rachel's autopsy determined that her death resulted from a stab wound to the head and neck, despite the initial theory suggesting strangulation. After interviewing various employees from Rachel's workplace and her ex-boyfriend, who had an alibi, the police continued to explore different possibilities regarding the attack. Detectives returned to Rachel's apartment to search for evidence or clues about the perpetrator. On the living room floor, they discovered Rachel's purse, which was missing her wallet. 2 weeks after the crime, Rachel's mother found the 9-inch steak knife used to stab her in a box in her apartment. However, the brutal nature of Rachel's torture suggests that the perpetrator was not simply a thief, but a psychopath who enjoyed abusing his power over his victims. Investigators explored various motives, but initially had no suspects. The details of Rachel's death were kept confidential to protect the investigation. Eventually, DNA samples were collected from different parts of Rachel's body and the crime scene. Unfortunately, these samples did not match any samples in the Special Services database. The video footage from street surveillance cameras captured two individuals using Rachel's car to drive around the city after her death. During this period, cash was withdrawn from her debit and credit cards. Location data identified a phone number that was in Rachel's apartment between 7:59 p.m. and 9:25 p.m. on January 28, 2018. Analyzing the evidence revealed the caller's whereabouts at various times. Once the account associated with the phone number was identified, investigators found the suspect, 54 years old Anthony Pardon. He had a criminal history that included multiple rapes, robbery, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Overall, he served 33 years in prison for his crimes. Anthony had a difficult upbringing. He was initially raised by his grandparents and later moved in with his mother. As a child, he was diagnosed with conduct disorder and antisocial personality disorder. In March 1979, at the age of 14, Anthony was briefly committed to the Ohio Youth Commission. By July of the same year, he was placed under court custody and transferred to Franklin County Children's Services. In December, he was again found guilty of making threats, leading to another transfer to the Ohio Youth Commission, where he was placed in foster care. In 1980, Anthony was charged with abuse, involving his foster parents' 15-year-old son. Then, he informed Columbus police that he committed the crime because he was upset after an argument with his girlfriend. As a result, Anthony was convicted as a juvenile. On November 13, 1981, when Anthony was 16, he visited his girlfriend's 39-year-old mother to use the telephone. During this visit, he threatened her with a butcher knife, assaulted her, and stole $100 from her purse. He tied her hands and feet, gagged her, and placed her in the trunk of his car. He drove to Valleydale, where he untied her feet and threw her into the river behind the Valleydale Ballroom. When he noticed that the partially clothed she was able to stay afloat, he entered the creek and held her head underwater. Fortunately, a passerby intervened and scared him away, allowing she to survive. Anthony fled the scene before the police arrived and used the money he had stolen from her to buy tennis shoes and jogging clothes. In May 1982, at the age of 17, he had been convicted of other crimes in Franklin and received a prison sentence ranging from 5 to 25 years. While incarcerated, he committed several rule violations, such as possessing a weapon, setting a mattress on fire, and engaging in fights. He ultimately spent more than 24 years in prison for his offenses and was released in November 2006. After his release, Anthony relocated to Georgia and applied for a job using a different name. In 2007, Anthony was charged with forgery papers and convicted in Floyd County, within a 9-year prison sentence. After serving his time, he received 20 years of probation and were required to wear a GPS ankle monitor. He was released from prison in 2017 and returned to Ohio in June of that year. According to an interstate agreement between Ohio and Georgia, he was supervised by the Adult Parole Authority and had to report to the Sheriff's Department every 90 days. The Ohio Adult Parole Authority did not give him a monitor, as the judge had requested. And Anthony was free once more. On August 21, 2017, he was found with a sex worker in his car, and 6 days later, he was caught driving without a license. During that traffic stop, police discovered he had a kitchen knife and a shotgun, but for some unknown reason, or due to police negligence, he was not arrested. Therefore, he is still continuing to commit crimes. CCTV footage captured Rachel's car parked outside a store. A man exited the passenger side of the car and entered the store. The driver was not visible in the footage. This makes the investigation more difficult than ever. However, after visiting the store and speaking with the employees, the police were able to identify the man. He was named Slits. A few days later, Slits was questioned at the police station. He said an adult man passing by approached him and offered to exchange his ex-girlfriend's card for cash. He agreed to this arrangement, which made him a co-conspirator in the Rachel case. Slits confirmed the identity of Anthony and detailed the entire route they took on the evening of January 28, 2018, while trying to cash in Rachel's stolen cards. The issue at hand was to locate and arrest Anthony. On February 9, 2018, after several days of track at Anthony's sister's house, he was successfully apprehended. The 54 years old, who had a history of crime, faced 9 charges, including burglary, aggravated robbery, kidnapping, rape, and aggravated murder. The trial commenced on February 4, 2020. On the first day of the trial, 4 witnesses provided their testimonies. Among them was Jonathan, a co-worker of Rachel, who found her body. He, along with the manager of Rachel's apartment complex, shared their accounts. The jury also heard testimony from Officer Frank Scani, who was parked outside the apartment when Jonathan discovered the body Rachel's and reviewed the surveillance footage. On February 5, Rachel's brother, John, and Special Agent Joshua Durst took the stand. Lead Detective Art Hughes testified the following day, on February 6. On that same day, Anthony expressed dissatisfaction with his attorneys to the judge and requested new representation. He appeared to be deliberately delaying the proceedings. On Monday, February 10, the prosecutors called a fingerprint expert and other specialists to explain how technology helped determine where Rachel's debit card was used and at the crime scene. Anthony's sister testified that he gave her Rachel's debit card, claiming it belonged to his girlfriend. She later discovered, through news reports, that the card actually belonged to the crime victim, Rachel. The final day of testimony was Tuesday, February 11th. The medical examiner reported finding Anthony's DNA at the scene, while a forensic pathologist and a deputy coroner from the Franklin County office detailed Rachel's injuries. In the courtroom, the final moments of Rachel's life were carefully reconstructed. She celebrated her 24th birthday on January 26 and 27, 2018. Her brother, John, traveled from Warren to Columbus to visit her. The following day, she and John went to the home of her friend and colleague, Jonathan, where they held a birthday party for she. After a long night of celebration, Rachel and her brother stayed overnight at their friend's house. The next morning, Rachel left for work, leaving her apartment key with her brother. On the 28th, John returned to his hometown and accidentally brought Rachel's house key with her. At around 1 p.m., Rachel texted John, person holding her house keys, to let him know she would come over to pick it up. Rachel talked to her mother around 6:30 p.m. and then went to John's place to get her key. Since her apartment door could only be locked from the outside with a key, she had to leave it open. After stopping for dinner at her favorite restaurant, Rachel arrived back at her apartment around 7:30 p.m. She then left the apartment, and Anthony was waiting for her outside. He kidnapped Rachel, taking her from the ground floor to the top floor. He used force to pin her down, then tying her legs with a hair dryer cord and her hands with a belt and curtain cord. Once she was unable to move, he wrapped a curling iron cord around her wrists to silence her and gagged her. He forced Rachel to provide him with the PIN numbers for her cards. He tortured her and exploited her vulnerability. Ultimately, he strangled her with a cord from an electric blanket. In addition to strangulation, he also caused blunt force trauma and inflicted a stab wound to her head. Afterward, he concealed her body in a closet, leaving her naked from the waist down with the electric blanket cord around her neck and the door handle. Anthony stole her car and used her bank cards at various stores in Columbus to make quick money. The defense did not present any witnesses. The final hearing took place on February 12. Assistant Prosecutor Amy Van Keulen gave the state's argument, outlining the timeline of the crime and telling the jury that Anthony murdered Rachel in cold blood. In his argument, the defense attorney, Larry Thomas, admitted that Anthony used Rachel's cards but said that he was not responsible for the murder. Attorney Larry argued that the state's case was based on mere speculation. He said that DNA evidence and cell phone data were not enough to prove Anthony's involvement in the crime. The jury, consisting of 4 men and 8 women, spent about 6 hours over 2 days discussing the case, before finding him guilty on all charges. The prosecution sought the death penalty because he killed Rachel during a burglary and he had previously been convicted of the attempted murder of a similar woman. They opted for the death penalty instead of seeking clemency because of his extensive criminal history. Prosecutor O.B. Bryan remarked that some individuals cannot follow the law, and Anthony is one of them. The sentencing phase of the trial started on February 18th. The defense aimed to lessen the severity of the punishment by highlighting Anthony's difficult childhood, but this argument was not effective. Prosecutors contended that the negative factors in the case were more significant than any positive ones. Additionally, it was established during the trial that Anthony understood his actions when he assaulted Rachel. Testimonies in Anthony's defense were given by his mother, sister, a psychologist, and his former elementary school teacher. On February 19th, Anthony gave a 13-minute speech before the jury, sharing details about his abusive childhood. He shared the struggles he encountered after his release from prison, expressing feelings of hardship and despair. He claimed that the law system let him down and that he received no support. And he attributed his current situation to the failures of the justice system. However, he neither addressed the crime he committed nor offered any apology in his remarks. On February 20th, after 3.5 hours of deliberation, the jury was unable to reach a consensus on whether to recommend the death penalty. Instead, they decided to recommend life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing occurred on March 16, 2020. Rachel's mother cried in court when the verdict was announced. Her father issued a sharing his thoughts on the investigation he had witnessed over the past few years. He was shocked to look a dangerous repeat offender making outrageous demands and acting as if he was entitled to something. He also was astonished to see an adult complaining about the system's shortcomings while trying to evade responsibility. Judge McIntosh sentenced Anthony Pardon to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for aggravated murder and another for violence. Furthermore, he received an additional 63 years for aggravated burglary, kidnapping, aggravated robbery, and several violent offenses. These sentences are to be served one after the other. Rachel's 24th birthday turned into a tragic day. A young woman with a bright future ahead of her had her life unexpectedly cut short. She was finishing up her internship and was on the verge of receiving a promising job offer. Rachel was laid to rest at Pine View Memorial Park, leaving her family and friends struggling to cope with the sudden loss. Every year on January 28, Rachel's family and friends light a candle at home to remember her. Rachel was a lively person with a beautiful smile and a loving heart. She was kind and always willing to help her friends. Throughout her life, she had many interests, but her main focus was her career. Rachel was naturally compassionate, loved dancing, and cherished time spent with family and friends. She had a special love for children and valued her life, which was sadly taken away too soon. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alicia Ross. Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980, in the Canadian city of Markham, in the province of Ontario. There's no information about her biological parents. All that's known is that they gave up their rights over the girl, and she was adopted a few months later by a couple named Marvin and Sharon Ross. Her adoptive parents surrounded her with love and care, doing everything they could to ensure their daughter lacked for nothing and could fully develop her talents. When Alicia started going to school, her adoptive parents decided to get divorced, but they maintained a friendly relationship and continued to support together in their daughter's life. Shortly after, Sharon remarried, and her new husband, named Julius Forrest, treated her as if she were his own daughter. Alicia did well in school, excelled at drawing, and also had a passion for photography, enjoying discovering new cities and countries. After finishing school, she spent a year in Australia, where she traveled and enjoyed life before returning home and enrolling in university. In the summer of 2005, Alicia went on a hiking trip in the mountains with her friends. She enjoyed spending time in nature, away from the busy city life. During the trip, she met a 29-year-old man named Sean, and they started a romantic relationship. The age difference of 4 years did not bother the couple. At the time, Alicia still lived in her adoptive parents' home, occupying the basement with a separate entrance, which allowed her to live independently from her parents. On August 16th, Alicia took a walk in the park with her adoptive mother and their dogs. Alicia seemed happy and shared that she was about to be promoted to the position of senior sales manager at work. She was very proud as she had been working hard for a long time, and her efforts were finally paying off. Additionally, Alicia talked to her mother about her boyfriend, Sean, whom she had been dating for just over a month but she seemed deeply in love with. Alicia hoped that this romance could develop into something more significant in the future and expressed a desire to introduce Sean to her adoptive parents by arranging a family dinner. After a stroll through the park, Sharon headed home, and Alicia went out on a date with her sweetheart, promising not to stay out too late because she had to get up early for work the next day. They said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. After meeting with Sean, Alicia invited him to her house. They had a good time together, and around midnight, he went home. Alicia accompanied him to the door, which served as a second exit from the backyard. They said goodbye with a kiss, and then he left, promising to call her as soon as he got home. Around midnight, as promised, Sean called his girlfriend, but she didn't answer the phone. He wasn't too worried, thinking that Alicia had simply fallen asleep since she had to get up early for work. However, the next morning, when he tried to call her again and she still didn't answer, he genuinely became concerned and contacted a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same office as Alicia. From her, he learned that Alicia had not gone to work, and he immediately rushed to her house. On the morning of August 17th, Sharon and Julius left their home around 10 a.m. to play golf with friends. They noticed their daughter's car in the driveway but assumed a colleague had picked her up, so they didn't think much of it and continued with their plans. About half an hour later, Sean arrived at the Ross residence and, finding no sign of Alicia there, he called the police to report her as a missing person. Sean also immediately contacted Sharon to inform her of the situation. Sharon and Julius rushed home immediately after hearing the news. By the time they arrived, the police were already present at the scene. Sean was the first person to notice the girl's disappearance and inform the authorities. Sean was also the last person to see Alicia alive and well the evening before she vanished. According to Sean, they had said goodbye at the gate where his car was parked around midnight, and she had not been in touch since then. When Sharon and Julius reached the house, law enforcement was already there, investigating the area and speaking with Sean, who had called them. Sean appeared visibly nervous and distraught. When the mother checked Alicia's room, she noticed that all of her daughter's personal belongings were still in their place. Her purse, passport, driver's license, keys, cell phone, bank cards, and cash were all left behind. The gate was open but not forced, suggesting that she either let her abductor in or willingly left the yard with someone. In the backyard, the police found some signs of disturbance. The lawn and flowers in one spot were trampled, as if someone had fallen there. Additionally, a pair of cigarettes and Alicia's right sandal, which she had been wearing the evening before, were found on the ground in a straight line. Neither Alicia nor her parents smoked, and Sean claimed he never smoked that particular brand. Sean was considered the prime suspect almost immediately. At first, he was clearly very nervous and his narration seemed a bit confusing and disjointed. Second, he was the first to report his girlfriend's disappearance to the police, even before speaking with her parents and confirming that they hadn't seen her either. Therefore, he definitely knew she was missing. Moreover, the authorities found biological traces of Sean and her on her bed. Based on this, the investigation speculated that Alicia may have rejected Sean's advances, and he decided to force himself on her, then trying to cover his tracks, and staging her disappearance, which likely resulted in her losing her life. Sean was brought to the police station and questioned. The investigator presented their theory to him, which left the young man stunned. He was dismayed to be the prime suspect and swore he would never harm his girlfriend, as he loved her. Sean admitted they had intimate moments that evening, but insisted it was consensual. Her parents had nothing bad to say about Sean. He hadn't argued with their daughter, hadn't mistreated her, and she spoke only well of him. Their relationship was progressing rapidly and quite happily, and Alicia even hoped to have a future with him. It's understandable that the parents are deeply concerned about their daughter's disappearance. The facts known so far suggest that she had no plans or reasons to leave her apartment. She was looking forward to a promotion at her workplace, and as a responsible person, it's unlikely she would have just abandoned everything. Even if there had been unforeseen circumstances, she would have surely informed her parents and taken her documents, money, and phone with her. The police couldn't find sufficient evidence to arrest Sean, so he was released after questioning. However, the investigators haven't completely ruled out Sean as a suspect and are continuing to monitor him. Sean himself seemed depressed and very disturbed. An intensive search for Alicia began the day after she went missing. Initially, a thorough inspection of the house and yard was conducted. Investigators examined the surrounding area in detail and interviewed neighbors. However, no one reported having heard or seen anything suspicious that night. The authorities theorized that the woman disappeared sometime between midnight, when she said goodbye to Sean, and dawn, a time when the streets are usually quiet and deserted, making it difficult to find witnesses. Flyers with Alicia's photos were distributed throughout the city, listing the phone numbers where people could provide any information about her whereabouts. The search for Alicia became one of the most extensive operations in the history of Ontario. Every rugged terrain, ravine, and swampy area were examined, but no clues, leads, or even suggestions about the whereabouts of the missing woman were found. Her parents also appealed to the public through the media, expressing their belief that their daughter was still alive but was being held against her will somewhere. They implored whoever had their daughter to let her return home unharmed and not to do her any harm. The police leaned towards the theory that someone Alicia knew personally had kidnapped her and possibly ended her life. This hypothesis was supported by the lack of signs of struggle, the absence of evidence of entry, and the fact that the door had been left open, but no concrete clues were found. The cigarette found on the floor had only a very smudged fingerprint that could not be identified. Investigators thoroughly reviewed Alicia's contacts and analyzed all calls and messages from her phone and email, but nothing suspicious was uncovered. On the sixth day of the search, the case was officially classified as a criminal offense, even though there was a lack of evidence, and Sean remained the main suspect. Sean lived alone in his own house about 10 miles from Alicia's house. After realizing that public suspicion had increased following his media appearance, he no longer participated in the search and refused to speak to the press. The investigators questioned Sean 3 more times, but his story remained consistent. He was then offered a lie detector test, which he refused, further convincing the police that he was involved in the crime. 2 weeks after the disappearance, Sean was arrested on an unrelated charge. He was pulled over late at night for driving under the influence and resisting arrest. Speculation arose that he was drowning his guilt in alcohol. After Sean's arrest, Alicia's parents gave another interview, sharing that they had not met him personally and only knew of him through their daughter's stories. They believed she was happy, but now Sharon considered the possibility that she may have withheld certain details to avoid upsetting them, despite having planned to introduce her boyfriend to her family soon. The police interviewed Sean's neighbors to determine if they had noticed anything unusual recently, such as him disposing of large trash bags, behaving suspiciously, leaving unexpectedly, or washing his car. However, these investigations did not yield any significant information. The detectives were left hoping that Sean would eventually confess everything. About a month after Alicia's disappearance, there was an unexpected development in the case. The initial media attention surrounding her case began to wane, and the search efforts continued but were no longer prominently featured in news reports. The investigation appeared to have reached a dead end. Then, on September 20th, 2005, more than a month after Alicia went missing, a completely unexpected twist occurred. A 31-year-old local resident named Daniel contacted the police and confessed to ending Alicia's life, providing the location where he had hidden her body. It's important to note that this man was never under suspicion, and the police had not considered him at all during their investigation. Initially, it seemed that the man simply craved fame and attention, and therefore decided to take responsibility for the most notorious case in recent years. However, all doubts were dispelled when the police found her body in the location he had indicated. Before delving into who this new person of interest was, let's examine why the police had not shown any interest in him previously. Daniel was an unemployed inmate who lived in his mother's house, which was adjacent to the Alicia family's home. Their house were separated by unkempt shrubs, forming an almost impenetrable barrier. Although the criminal and the victim had lived practically their entire lives right next to each other, they had never interacted before. Alicia had observed Daniel behaving in an unusual manner on his house, leading her to believe he might be mentally unwell. Daniel had experienced significant socialization issues from a young age. He lacked friends, was mocked at school, and all his attempts to form relationships were unsuccessful, causing him to develop a deep resentment towards women. As a child, girls had rejected him, calling him a loser and refusing to associate with him. At the age of 8, Daniel was diagnosed with a socializing behavioral disorder and had been receiving ongoing psychological treatment. Although therapy did not significantly improve his condition, during his teenage years, he confessed to having fantasies of suddenly attacking and overpowering a girl, which excited him. However, specialists remained confident that these fantasies would remain within his imagination. After finishing school, Daniel stopped attending therapy sessions and decided not to continue his education. He became a recluse, living in his mother's house and isolating himself from the outside world. Daniel spent most of his days in his room, often visiting adult websites. Occasionally, he would venture out in the evenings to secretly observe his neighbors, peeping into their windows. He seemed particularly interested in watching when someone was engaged in intimate activities, which excited him. Daniel initially claimed that Alicia's death was accidental and he hid the body to avoid punishment. He said that when he realized she showed no signs of life, he placed her body in the trunk of his mother's car and drove about 50 miles out of town, hiding it in a bushy ravine by the side of a country road. 3 weeks later, fearing the body would be discovered, he moved it in the middle of the night to a deserted area. The body was found in the place Daniel indicated, confirming Daniel's guilt. The condition of the remains suggested the girl had been treated with extreme cruelty. Alicia seemed to have been hit by a vehicle. The forensic examination revealed that she had almost all of her ribs broken, her neck and both arms fractured, and extensive closed head trauma with internal bleeding. The exact cause of death could not be determined. The forensic experts were surprised, as they had never seen anything like it before. It was necessary to clarify all the circumstances and the timeline of events that fateful night to precisely determine how Alicia suffered such injuries. Initially, the convicted man claimed he had had an argument with his neighbor on a path covered in bushes between their houses. At some point during the verbal altercation, she called him a loser, which angered him, and he struck her in the head. When she fell, he kicked her several times in the chest. When he realized she wasn't breathing, he decided to hide the body and then moved it again when the search area expanded. However, there was something in his story that didn't add up. There were missing details and specifics. For example, it wasn't clear what Daniel was doing at his neighbor's house at night, why they started arguing, what caused such a brutal beating, and why the evidence found at the scene was arranged in a straight line. Restoring the full picture of events was challenging, but law enforcement managed to do so. That evening, Daniel went to spy on his neighbors. He noticed that Alicia's boyfriend had come over, so he approached their house closely. As the couple was being intimate, he watched them from a window. Then he moved back to the bushes but did not leave. Closer to midnight, the lovers went outside and kissed by the gate, just a couple of feet away from the lurking neighbor. When Sean left, the girl returned to the yard and noticed Daniel. She became very angry, realizing that he had been spying on her and her boyfriend all this time. She started yelling at him, calling him a pervert, and demanded that he leave immediately. Finally, Alicia called him a loser, after which she turned around and was about to go back into the house. This is a very disturbing and violent incident. The victim was subjected to a brutal physical assault, with the perpetrator striking her numerous times in the head, neck, chest, and back, causing extensive injuries and internal bleeding. After realizing the victim had died, the perpetrator moved the body to his garage, stripped her naked, and masturbated. He then placed the corpse in the trunk of his mother's car and transported it to a remote location outside the city. This sequence of events indicates a severe lack of empathy and disregard for human life. The language used is graphic and unsettling, but necessary to convey the gravity of the situation. Upon returning to his home, the criminal took a shower, changed his clothes, and behaved as if nothing had happened. His clothes, as well as the personal belongings of the victim and the towels he used to clean the crime scene, were bagged and disposed of. The trial and sentencing only began in April 2007, when new details were made public. The accused confessed to having taken the life of his neighbor, but he and his lawyer insisted that it was an involuntary act. Additionally, the defense requested a psychiatric evaluation, indicating that Daniel was ill and should not be considered responsible for his actions, suggesting that he should be treated in a clinic rather than incarcerated. However, the prosecution argued that, despite his mental illness and issues with anger management, Daniel acted with full awareness of the consequences of his actions. He ruthlessly kicked Alicia with all his might, knowing that this would likely result in her death. Nevertheless, the court-ordered psychiatric evaluation confirmed that the accused could be fully responsible for his actions. Regarding the items found in the backyard, Daniel never admitted to having placed them in a straight line. On May 7, 2007, Daniel Sylvester was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 16 years. A year later, Canadian singer-songwriter Kathleen Edwards wrote a song titled Alicia Ross, which portrayed the events from the perspective of Alicia during the final moments of her life. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Debbie Lynn Randall. Debbie Randall was born on August 21, 1962, in Marietta, Georgia, to a family with two older brothers. Although Debbie's parents divorced when she was young, but her father always gave her love and care. Her mother later married a man named Roy, who became Debbie's stepfather. The family resided in a small apartment building, in a quiet neighborhood nearby a military base. Debbie was a happy and outgoing child who enjoyed socializing with friends, playing basketball and collecting dolls, which she would often spend hours playing with. On January 13, 1972, 9-year-old Debbie had dinner with her family. Afterward, her mother asked her to go to the nearby laundromat, a task she had done many times before. Debbie's job was to supervise the laundry while it washed. A family member would accompany her to the laundromat to help carry the clothes, but they would return home, leaving Debbie to wait for the wash cycle to finish. The laundromat was just across the street from their home, so her mother is not too worried. It was a common practice at the time for children to help with household chores, like laundry. In fact, Debbie had even made friends with other girls she met at the laundromat. Her mother wants to let Debbie's brother go with her that day, but he wasn't feeling well and preferred to stay home and watch his favorite TV show. Her mom then asked her husband to take the laundry instead, and Debbie accompanied him, bringing a box of detergent along the way. When they arrived, her stepdad unloaded the laundry into 2 washing machines and then left. Debbie stayed behind to wait for the wash cycle to finish. Once it was done, she planned to walk home and ask someone to come back and pick up the clean clothes, as she wasn't strong enough to carry them all by herself. After a while, Debbie's mom realized she hadn't returned home, despite the fact that the laundry had been finished. As the sun started to set, she and her husband decided to look for Debbie. They walked to the laundromat but didn't find her there. A staff member told them that Debbie had left a while ago, and she hadn't returned yet. Getting concerned, Debbie's mom and her husband, Roy, started searching the surrounding streets for her. During their search, they noticed something unusual. A short distance from the laundromat, in the parking lot, detergent had been spilled next to one of the cars. This caught her attention because Debbie had been carrying a box of detergent. Her mom immediately suspected that the spilled detergent might be connected to Debbie's disappearance. They continued to search the parking lot and the surrounding area for Debbie, but no other signs of her were found. Neighbors who were familiar with Debbie's family joined the search, but despite their efforts, no progress was made. Debbie's mother decided to call the police. Officers checked the area in the parking lot where the detergent had been spilled. The police noticed a new lead, near a parked car close to the detergent. Multiple clear fingerprints were visible on the car door, just inches away from the spilled detergent. What caught their attention was that the fingerprints looked fresh, and they were located very low to the door handle, which raised suspicions. The police suspected that an unknown person may have taken Debbie and touched the car in the process, leaving the fingerprints behind. The police collected the fingerprints and handed them over to forensic experts for analysis. At the same time, the police began searching for the car's owner to determine whether the fingerprints belonged to them or an unknown person. The police began searching the streets for additional clues or witnesses. The laundromat employee reported that she had not noticed anything unusual. According to her, Debbie had been waiting for her laundry to finish and then left the building with a box of detergent, likely heading home to ask someone to pick up her clothes. However, it was not long before the police found their first key witness, whose statement would change the direction of the investigation. Sandra, a 12 years old, was walking to the laundromat with her friend to do some laundry. As they approached the laundromat, they witnessed a disturbing scene. A man grabbed a girl from the street and pulled her into his parked car near the laundromat. The girl struggled to free herself and screamed, but the man quickly got into the driver's seat and sped away. In the process, he almost hit Sandra and her friend. One of them shouted after the car as it drove off, but it was too late. At the time, Sandra didn't think much of the incident, assuming the man was the girl's father or a relative picking her up. She didn't report the incident to the police or tell any adults about what she had seen. A crucial witness came forward after learning about Debbie's abduction, providing investigators with vital information. The witness reported that the perpetrator's vehicle was a dark-colored pickup truck. possibly a 1957 model. She described the driver as a young white male with thick, dark hair, wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and black work boots. Additionally, another girl who lived in the same building as Debbie shared her own observations from that evening. As she stood outside her apartment, a dark pickup truck drove by, initially her think it was her uncle behind the wheel. However, when the driver stopped in front of her and made eye contact, she realized it was not her uncle. A woman gave investigators a detailed description of a suspect, a white man in his 30s with medium-length dark hair. After gathering more information, they discovered another important witness who lived near the victim's house. The witness nearly collided with a dark pickup truck, possibly a Dodge, which was driving erratically. The driver, around 30 years old with dark hair, was recklessly maneuvering the vehicle. What caught the witness's attention was a girl inside the truck, desperately trying to escape while being restrained by the driver's one hand. The police distributed information about the suspect's vehicle to all patrol units and had police artists create a sketch based on the descriptions provided by the three witnesses. The search was divided into two main directions, with some officers searching for similar vehicles and verifying the owners, while others focused on locating Debbie. Each day, the search operation grew, with more volunteers and police officers from neighboring towns joining in. Approximately 4,000 people participated in the large-scale search operation, a record-setting number for both the city and the state. Meanwhile, detectives investigated Debbie's acquaintances, including her male neighbors, stepfather, and biological father. However, after the investigation, all of them were ruled out as suspects. Debbie's father, who lived in the same city, was informed of his daughter's disappearance and immediately joined the search. Detectives searched for Debbie by checking the backgrounds of previously convicted criminals living nearby, but they didn't find any suspects. Despite 2 weeks of searching, no leads were found. On January 29th, students joined the search and were tasked with searching a wooded area close to Debbie's home. After nearly 5 hours of searching, one of the students found footprints leading off the trail and into the forest, indicating that something had been dragged. Following the tracks 150 feet into the woods, the students stumbled upon a human body. They immediately contacted the officers, and they quickly confirmed that the body was Debbie Randall. She was wearing a lavender dress and a dark blue zip-up jacket with a hood, matching the description provided by her mother on the day she went missing. However, her new lavender shoes, a Christmas gift she had received just weeks earlier and was particularly fond of, were missing. She still had her socks on, but her shoes were nowhere to be found. Debbie's body was examined by medical experts, who concluded that she died from strangulation and had also been assaulted sex. A single dark hair was found on her body, which likely belonged to the killer. However, since DNA analysis was not available at that time, this evidence could not be further analyzed. The experts used a microscope to examine the hair and made a guess, based on their knowledge at the time, that it belonged to a man between 18 and 30 years old. Debbie's clothing was contaminated with dirt, which, in the absence of other leads, detectives decided to scrutinize more closely. They consulted a geologist who worked with the forensic team to analyze the dirt. The results showed that some of the dirt was a specific type of clay, which was from a location less than 10 miles from the city. Further examination confirmed that this clay was the unique Northern Georgia clay. Additionally, distinct dirt stains from another type of clay were discovered, originating from a local mining site just 2 miles from the location of the body. Detectives developed a theory about the incident surrounding Debbie's death. They believed that the perpetrator did not kill she immediately. Instead, they think the perpetrator first drove she to a remote area outside of town where they sexually assaulted her. The perpetrator then drove to another location where they killed Debbie. After her death, the perpetrator transported his body to a forest and leaving it there. This theory is supported by evidences, including clay samples and forensic analysis, which suggest that Debbie was already dead when her body was brought to the forest. The absence of signs of a struggle in the forest area also lends credibility to this theory. The locations of the clay mining sites were remote and difficult to access, suggesting that the killer might have familiarized themselves with the area through work. A mining company supervisor confirmed that the area was hard to navigate even for experienced workers, making the possibility that a stranger could take Debbie there impossible. Police investigated employees from both companies, searching for a man matching the description suspects or someone with a similar car, but this investigation did not produce any leads. They also found fingerprints on the car near the abduction site, which they compared to those of all suspects, but unfortunately, this did not yield any results. The news of Debbie's brutal murder sent shockwaves throughout the city, drawing thousands to her funeral to pay their respects. Despite the local police department's relentless pursuit of justice, the case hit numerous roadblocks, leaving investigators with no new leads for years. The case went cold, but detectives continued to work tirelessly, scrutinizing dozens of suspects yet struggling to establish their involvement. For lead detective Morris Nix, who was just 19 when the case began and has been involved from the start, solving Debbie's murder has become his primary motivation. He pursued multiple leads and suspects over the years, carefully evaluating the evidence and eventually narrowing down the list to 4 men he considered the most likely suspects. The FBI created a DNA database, and experts were able to obtain the perpetrator's genetic profile from a hair found on Debbie's body. The DNA was added to the database, but no matches were found. This suggests that the killer had either never committed a serious crime before or their DNA had not been collected by authorities yet. 43 years after the murder, in 2015, detectives reopened the case and decided to reanalyze Debbie's clothing using advanced technology, as the items had been stored in the evidence warehouse all that time. Experts discovered biological material from a man on the evidence. Debbie's mother spent decades hoping to see her daughter's killer caught and brought to justice. In a 2018 interview, she revealed the pain of living in an apartment where there were many memories of her daughter. Although she eventually moved to a new city, the lack of progress in the case weighed heavily on her for years. When she gets old, her one wish was to see the case resolved before she passed away. Sadly, she passed away from cancer at 78, just weeks after the interview, and her wish was left unfulfilled. She was laid to rest beside her daughter. In 2019, the local police department received extra funding, allowing them to conduct a more detailed analysis of Debbie's clothes. The experts successfully extracted a full DNA sample, but unfortunately, the perpetrator's DNA was not found in the FBI database. Debbie's father was also interviewed, sharing that he thought about Debbie every day over the decades. He held on to a box of her old photos, hoping to reunite with her in heaven. Sadly, he passed away in 2022, just after the interview. In 2022, detectives focused on the case, following their one lead, DNA. They contacted a Florida company that specialized in genetic genealogy, an innovative DNA analysis method. The police provided the company with all the biological samples they had collected over the years. Using these samples, experts created a DNA profile of the suspect and searched for his relatives in genetic databases. To identify the killer, investigators exhaustively examined thousands of using genetic genealogy, then they focused on one family in Marietta. In 2023, the family members willingly provided DNA samples, which helped investigators establish a familial connection to the killer. The results confirmed that the killer was a close relative of this family. After conducting a more thorough investigation, experts were able to identify one person, William Rose, could be the owner of the DNA sample. However, Rose had died in 1974, 2 years after the murder. Undeterred, detectives sought to finally resolve the case and obtained a warrant to exhume William's remains, enabling experts to collect a direct DNA sample. After 51 years, police finally discovered the identity of Debbie's killer. William Rose, who was 24 years old at the time, matched the DNA evidence and was revealed to be the perpetrator. Notably, William had never been a suspect in the investigation. Further research showed that his relatives lived in the same building as Debbie's family, and he often visited them. Investigators believe this frequent contact likely gave him multiple opportunities to see Debbie. On the evening of the murder, it's possible that William was heading to visit his relatives, and he encountered Debbie leaving the laundromat. According to witness testimonies, William pulled his vehicle into the parking lot between Debbie's house and the laundromat. He left the engine running, exited his vehicle, grabbed Debbie, and drove north. The direction of his escape led police to suspect that he may have immediately driven to a nearby clay quarry. Notably, William had no other serious criminal offenses on record. It is unclear whether he committed other crimes that went undetected or if Debbie's murder was an isolated incident. By the time the case was solved, the only living close relative of Debbie was her older brother, Melvin. He attended a press conference where the identification of the culprit was announced and expressed gratitude to everyone involved in solving his younger sister's case after more than 50 years. Melvin also shared that he wished his mother had lived to see this moment, but he took comfort in believing that she was now reunited with Debbie in heaven. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Diana D. Aiello. Diana Aiello was born in 1959 in Tustin, a suburb of Los Angeles. Her father had a military career, and her mother worked at a local garment factory. At the age of 19, Diana's life took a major turn when she met Kevin Green at a bar. She was at the bar with her friends when some men started bothering them. He was being aggressive, so Kevin decided to intervene. After Kevin chased the men away, Diana offered to buy him a drink as a thank you. A few days later, they started dating, and things went pretty fast from there. At the time, Kevin was married, but he and his wife were in the process of getting a divorce. Kevin and Diana decided to move in together, and Diana soon became pregnant. As soon as Kevin's divorce was finalized, they got married that same day, eagerly awaiting the birth of their daughter. They rented an apartment in a small apartment complex in Tustin. Kevin worked as a helicopter mechanic at a nearby Marine Corps base, while Diana had previously worked at her mother's garment factory. However, because she was pregnant, she chose to stay home and prepare for the arrival of her daughter. By the end of September 1979, Diana was close to giving birth and could go into labor at any moment. On the evening of September 30th, after a night of watching a movie together, Diana and her husband had a disagreement. The impending birth of their child was causing them stress, and they were constantly arguing. To calm down and avoid escalating the situation, Kevin decided to drive to a nearby fast food restaurant. About 40 minutes later, Kevin contacted the local police department, reporting a heartbreaking situation. His wife had been shot and needed immediate assistance by ambulance. At that time, a patrol car was nearby and the police quickly arrived at the scene. When they entered the apartment, they found Diana lying on the bed in the bedroom, covered in blood, apparently from a head wound similar to a gunshot wound. The bedroom wall was also covered in blood. Diana was showing signs of life, struggling to breathe, so the police began first aid while they waited for the ambulance. They also asked Kevin to leave the room because they were still unsure of what had happened. When paramedics arrived, they carefully loaded Diana into the ambulance for further medical attention. Initially, the paramedics suspected that Diana had been shot, but it was later determined that her injuries were actually blunt force trauma. Kevin wanted to go with his wife, but the police would not allow it. They needed him to give a statement, and at that time, they were investigating every possible scenario, including the possibility that Kevin was involved in the attack. Kevin, in shock, did not understand what the police were saying, even tried to get into the ambulance that was leaving, forcing the police to intervene and stop him. Kevin regained his composure and then explained the events of that night to the police. He had an argument with his wife and decided to leave the apartment to calm down. He drove to a fast food restaurant to buy some burgers. As he left the apartment, he realized he had left his keys inside but decided not to go back to get them. Instead, he closed the door and walked to his car. While driving, he noticed a truck nearby with the back door open. Kevin reported seeing an African-American man parking the truck near their apartment complex. At around 2 a.m., Kevin decided to stop by his favorite fast food joint, but the line was too crowded, which discouraged him. So he chose another location of the same chain nearby. About 40 minutes later, after buying some burgers, he arrived home to find the front door wide open. This was unusual. Kevin rushed inside and heard strange noises. When he entered the bedroom, he was shocked to see Diana lying in a pool of blood and struggling to breathe. Kevin immediately called the police for help. Kevin's story was somewhat confusing and raised many questions. Going out for a burger in the middle of the night seemed unusual. It took him about 40 minutes to make the trip, which was quite long considering all the restaurants were close to his home. The police checked the fast food bag and found the food was still warm. The receipt contained the restaurant's address and time of purchase, which matched Kevin's account. After verifying this, the police allowed Kevin to go to the hospital, but first, they requested a blood sample to compare with traces of blood found at the crime scene. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors examined her head wound and determined that it was not caused by a gunshot. Instead, it appeared that her attacker had used a small, heavy object, such as a piece of wood, to hit her multiple times. Diana soon fell into a coma at the hospital, prompting doctors to work urgently to save both her and her unborn child. After several tense hours, they were able to stabilize Diana, but she still needed surgery. During this time, the police asked medical professionals to evaluate whether Diana had been sexually assaulted. The examination was part of standard investigative procedures, and the position in which Diana was found prompted the police to consider the possibility. Experts confirmed that there were traces of semen on her body. However, Kevin told the police that he had had sex with Diana just hours before the argument, and that DNA analysis results were not yet available at that time. Therefore, even with a biological sample from the perpetrator, there was not much that could be done. Kevin and Diana's family waited anxiously at the hospital overnight, hoping that Diana and her baby would pull through. However, in a tragic turn of events, the baby's condition suddenly worsened the next morning. Despite the doctor's best efforts, they were unable to save the baby. Diana underwent emergency surgery shortly after the baby's death and her condition stabilized. Although she remained in a coma, chances of survival were relatively high. And the medical team hope that she can recover and return to normal life after such a serious injury. Meanwhile, the police are trying to identify the person who attacked Diana. After the baby's death, the case was reclassified as a homicide, causing the local police department to allocate all available resources to solve the case. Although Kevin provided an alibi, the police were not quick to rule him out as a suspect. His story raised many questions. He had argued with his wife just hours before the attack, left the front door unlocked, and was absent for an extended period of time during a trip to the fast food restaurant. However, there was no evidence against Kevin. His claim of seeing a suspicious man near his home in the middle of the night led the police to another suspect. About a year before this case, crimes with a similar modus operandi began occurring in and around Tustin. In December 1978, a 17-year-old girl was the victim of a fatal break-in and assault. The perpetrator broke into her apartment, beat her with a wooden object, and sexually assaulted her. 4 months later, a similar case occurred. A 21-year-old woman was killed in her own home after being beaten with a piece of wood by an intruder. In July 1979, an unknown perpetrator broke into another woman's apartment and did the same to her, her injuries leaving her in a coma for several weeks. She eventually recovered. However, her testimony did not provide any new leads for the police to catch the perpetrator. In September 1979, less than a month before Diana's attack, a similar series of events occurred to a 31-year-old woman who died the following day. All of the cases had striking similarities, leading the police to suspect that they were dealing with a serial killer, similar to the one who attacked Diana. The police focused all their efforts on capturing this individual, who had earned the nickname the Bedroom Destroyer. Due to the short time between the cases and the fact that the perpetrator was operating in a relatively small suburb of Los Angeles, the police believed that he might strike again soon. The police decided to issue a public warning through the media, warning all women living alone, especially those living in ground-floor apartments, as they appeared to be the serial killer's primary targets. The announcement caused widespread panic, prompting many women to purchase self-defense products, sign up for self-defense classes, and temporarily move in with friends or family for safety. The police interviewed anyone who might have had any connection to the crimes, and they soon received their first leads. Several of the victims' neighbors reported seeing a suspicious white man with thick black hair near their home. Although the description was vague, the police found several men who matched and investigated them, but got nowhere. 7 days after Diana was attacked, doctors updated her family on her condition. She had regained consciousness, but unfortunately, her recovery was fraught with complications. Diana was unable to speak or recall her memories because her brain functioned at the level of a normal 6-year-old. Her brain needed time to recover. During this time, a similar incident occurred in Tustin. A 24-year-old woman was brutally attacked in her apartment by an unknown assailant, who beat her with a wooden object and sexually assaulted her. Sadly, the woman's injuries were fatal. Despite their efforts, the police were unable to arrest the perpetrator. Diana spent several more days in the hospital, and her mind gradually returned to normal. Despite this progress, she still struggled with severe memory loss and could not remember her parents. Doctors informed her family that her memory might recover over time, but they advised against reminding her of anything and instead letting her remember on her own once her health stabilized. When Diana was well enough, she was discharged and her family took her home. Because Kevin had to continue working on the military base to support the family financially, they decided to move in with Diana's parents, who could care for her around the clock. 6 weeks after the attack, Diana was still attending physical therapy sessions and her condition was gradually improving. She still couldn't speak or remember what had happened to her, but that all changed suddenly 6 weeks after the attack. When her therapist brought up the attack and asked if Diana remembered anything about her attacker, Diana responded in surprise, nodding and pointing to her wedding ring, a sudden revelation that took her doctor by surprise. When Diana's mother came to pick her up, the doctor told her about this, and the mother asked her daughter, "Was it Kevin who attacked you?" Diana nodded. Right after that, her mother took her to the police station, where she spoke with the lead detective. He asked Diana a few more questions, and she confirmed that she suddenly remembered the moment of the attack and that the perpetrator was none other than her husband. For the detective, this completely changed the course of the case. He and his team were almost certain that Diana was attacked by the same serial criminal responsible for the other similar attacks. But now the detective faced several questions. Could Kevin be the bedroom basher? He lived in the same area where the attacks happened and even matched the description provided by several witnesses who saw a white man with dark hair. Or did Kevin decide to get rid of his wife by disguising himself as the active killer? Considering that all the actions of the bedroom basher were almost identical each single time, it wouldn't have been difficult. The detective thought that if he arrested Kevin now, his involvement in other crimes might never be proven, and Kevin himself could flee as soon as he realized he was caught. So he made a difficult decision. He asked Diana and her mother to pretend that Diana still remembered nothing and to return home to Kevin. This was obviously a huge challenge for both of them, but they agreed nonetheless. Investigators put Kevin under surveillance and closely monitored all his movements, hoping to eventually link him to other attacks. Police spoke with Kevin's friends to learn more about the suspect. And they quickly found out something interesting. Those who knew him well said that his relationship with Diana was quite tense. The couple argued frequently, a fact also confirmed by neighbors who often heard their screams. According to friends, Kevin regularly complained to them that Diana refused to be intimate with him in the final months of her pregnancy. Yet Kevin had described his relationship with Diana to detectives as nearly perfect. But besides that, detectives couldn't gather any additional useful information. Kevin behaved quite normally. He went to work and came back home without lingering anywhere else and didn't raise any suspicions. The police also received results from the lab revealing an interesting discovery. Besides the attacker's semen, they found skin particles with blood under Diana's nails. Specialists matched the blood type of the attacker to Kevin's blood sample, and it matched. It meant that Kevin had the same blood type as the person who attacked Diana. Based on this information, detectives came up with the most likely version of what had happened on that fateful night. Kevin indeed bought burgers at a fast food joint a few miles from home. The time on the receipt and cashier's words confirmed his presence. So, the detectives believed he could have attacked Diana before leaving home, then quickly went to the fast food restaurant to create an alibi explaining the extended 40-minute trip. Regarding motive, detectives theorized that Diana's refusal to engage in intimacy served as the trigger. Despite Kevin's claim that they had had sex hours before the incident, he frequently complained to friends about Diana's reluctance for months. Given the severity of the attack, detectives believed this was Kevin's breaking point. The police re-interviewed Diana, who confirmed she vividly remembered the attack and that Kevin was indeed the one who assaulted her. During the conversation, her mother said they could no longer pretend and live under the same roof as Kevin. The police decided to arrest Kevin without arresting him at Diana's home to avoid endangering her family. Instead, they arrested him at a store. Despite his arrest, Kevin maintained his innocence, claiming that everything happened exactly as he told them. As the trial proceeded, preparations took nearly 10 months to complete. During this time, Diana's health gradually improved, allowing her to regain her ability to speak, albeit with some difficulty. Diana was examined by multiple doctors, all of whom agreed that her brain had recovered and that she was now a credible witness. In court, Diana positively identified her husband as her attacker that night. However, Kevin's defense team argued that he was innocent, claiming that he was at a fast food restaurant at the time of the incident. Unfortunately for Kevin, Diana's testimony was stronger than his alibi, resulting in a guilty verdict. As a result, in November 1980, Kevin was convicted of murdering his child and assaulting Diana. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In the wake of Kevin's possible involvement in the serial killings, the police noticed something interesting. Before Kevin was arrested, there had been 2 more similar cases in their county. But both victims survived. They had not yet been able to identify the attacker, so his identity remained unknown. But after Kevin was arrested, the attack suddenly stopped. Before that, the bedroom wrecker had committed crimes quite frequently, sometimes only a few weeks apart. However, after Kevin was arrested, there were no more similar cases. After the verdict, Diana filed for divorce, and Kevin did not object. Diana then focused on recovering her health, but her progress was slow due to the severity of her injuries. She lost some of her hearing and vision, and she was having difficulty speaking. Meanwhile, Kevin never gave up on his claim of innocence, even after many years had passed. However, life in prison was extremely difficult for him. Fellow inmates often targeted him because he was convicted of murdering a child, which led to him being hospitalized several times. Kevin applied for parole but was denied by the board. He continued to receive 3 more denials in the following years. The main reason for these decisions was Kevin's refusal to plead guilty, which was seen as a lack of remorse. When DNA analysis became a standard tool in forensic science, Kevin requested that his DNA be compared to existing samples. However, his request was denied because he could not afford the analysis. In 1996, the police department reopened the investigation into a series of attacks believed to have been committed by the bedroom basher. During this time, semen samples taken from the victims' bodies were stored in a laboratory. Now, the police had a chance to identify the perpetrator behind all of these crimes. Kevin was still considered the prime suspect, but DNA analysis revealed something surprising. When experts compared the DNA profile, the semen samples matched the DNA of another man, a man named Gerald Parker. Gerald was arrested the same year as Kevin. His crime involved the attack on a 13-year-old girl in Tustin, and he was arrested shortly thereafter. Initially, the police did not link this case to the other series of attacks because of the different attack methods. The bedroom basher typically targeted his victims at night while they were in their apartments, while Parker attacked the girl on the street. He has since served his sentence in prison and is expected to be released in a few days. After police got a DNA match for Gerald in the unsolved cases, they re-examined the Diana attack. Although the crime was considered solved, police still considered Diana's case to be connected to the serial killer cases. They now understood that Kevin was definitely not a serial killer, leaving them with only one question: did he really attack his wife? Gerald was stationed at the same military base as Kevin and owned a dark-colored truck during that time. Notably, on the day of the incident, Kevin reported to police that he saw an African-American man near a dark-colored truck outside their home. This statement led police to consider the possibility that Parker may have been involved in the attack on Diana. The local prosecutor visited Kevin in prison and updated him on the progress of the bedroom basher murder investigation. During the visit, the prosecutor asked Kevin to provide a direct DNA sample for analysis. Kevin, who had been trying to do this for years, immediately agreed. While the experts were analyzing Kevin's DNA, the police went to see Gerald in prison. At that time, they had not yet charged him with the series of attacks, because they needed time to prepare such a complex case. However, the police decided to talk to Gerald, hoping that he might confess. Gerald initially denied any involvement in the series of crimes. To get more information, the police changed the subject and asked him about the attack on Diana. Before proceeding with the interrogation, they reviewed his file and discovered an important detail. After being arrested for attacking the girl, he told the police that military service was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The police took advantage of this information, questioning how he could have let another soldier take responsibility for his crimes. They continued to pressure him by appealing to his loyalty to the army. This strategy eventually yielded a breakthrough when Gerald surprisingly revealed that another man was actually serving time for the murder he had committed. Gerald admitted that he had driven to Kevin's house in his truck that night. His intention was to explore the neighborhood in his truck, looking into ground floor windows for potential victims, as he had done many times before. However, when he arrived, he heard screaming coming from Kevin and Diana's apartment, and when a man walked out, Gerald noticed that the man had left the door unlocked when he left. After waiting for a few minutes, Gerald entered the apartment and attacked Diana. He said he had not known Diana's husband before, as they had been on different assignments at the military base. Gerald confessed to several crimes. including 6 murders and 3 non-fatal assaults, in addition to the crimes for which Kevin had been wrongly convicted. DNA testing confirmed Gerald's guilt and Kevin's innocence, supporting Gerald's confession. The prosecutor promised to overturn his conviction as soon as possible, and a few days later, Kevin was released after 16 years in prison. The development caused public outrage, not only because an innocent man had been wrongly imprisoned for nearly half his life, but also because it took the police so long to identify the real culprit. After Kevin was released, the state of California paid him $10,000 in restitution. A few years later, he received an additional $100 per day payment for his time in prison, totaling $620,000. But the story doesn't end there. Even though Kevin was completely exonerated, Diana still refused to believe in his innocence. Up until that point, she had claimed that Kevin was the only one who attacked her. However, after biological material from her body matched Gerald's DNA, she came up with a different story. Diana said she was attacked and assaulted by Kevin, who then left, followed by Gerald. However, Gerald claimed that when he entered the apartment, Diana was lying on the bed without any injuries or signs of distress. And he admitted to hitting her on the head. Diana's family offered another explanation. Kevin may have colluded with Gerald to commit the crime, which would explain why Kevin left the house with the door open. Gerald, on the other hand, repeatedly denied knowing Kevin, pointing out that the military base was home to many people who did not know each other. Kevin also insisted that he had nothing to do with Gerald and vowed that he would never harm Diana or their unborn child. He insisted that his only mistake was leaving the door open because he did not want to go back to get the keys immediately after an argument with his wife, a decision that still haunts him. Diana maintained her version of events, and one reason may have been the severe trauma she suffered during the attack. The trauma had a profound impact on her brain. When Diana awoke from her coma, doctors advised her family not to inform her of what had happened, as her brain was extremely sensitive to new information at that time. She would treat any details provided as real and accurate memories. It is worth noting that even at the time of Kevin's release, 16 years after the incident, she continued to experience severe post-traumatic stress. This suggests that the effects of the trauma had affected her brain beyond repair. It is also possible that the trauma was the main reason she convicted Kevin of involvement. Gerald Parker was sentenced to death in 1999, but the death penalty has not yet been carried out. Instead, due to California's moratorium on the death penalty, Gerald remains in prison to serve his sentence. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Els van Doren. Els van Doren is a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to a jeweler in Antwerp named Jan de Wilde. They has 2 children, Vincent de Wilde and Carol de Wilde. Although she works in the family jewelry store, Elsa's real passion is skydiving. Els began skydiving with her husband in 1994. Gradually, her passion for skydiving grew rapidly over time. With over 2,300 jumps under her belt, she became an experienced skydiver. She devoted most of her weekends and holidays to the sport. In 1998, Els began skydiving in formation, and 3 years later, in 2001, she became a member of an all-female skydiving team called the Divas. The team competed in the 2003 World Parachute Championships, but Els was forced to leave the team in 2004 due to health problems stemming from a persistent hernia. After recovering, she turned to parachuting as a recreational activity instead of continuing to compete professionally. He became a member of the Swartberg Parachute Club, and by 2006, her jump total had exceeded 2,300. In the Parachute Club, she formed a close friendship with a fellow parachutist and schoolteacher, a 26-year-old named Els Klotmans. To differentiate between the two of them within the club, Els van Doren suggested calling Els Klotmans by the nickname Babs. They both learned to parachute under the guidance of Marcel Summers, another club member who knew both women. The trio developed a deep friendship and even became companions on their skydiving adventures. However, over time, Els found herself growing attached to Marcel, despite her husband. Their friendship gradually developed into a romantic relationship. Since her family was accustomed to her being away on weekends for the skydiving club, they did not suspect anything regarding her relationship with Marcel. Indeed, they often went to Marcel's apartment on weekends and stayed together without worries. Unbeknownst to Els and Babs, they not only shared the same name but also loved the same man. Marcel secretly maintained romantic relationships with both women. To keep the two relationships balanced, Marcel created a schedule. He devoted Fridays to Babs and Saturdays to Els. This arrangement initially worked to Marcel's advantage. However, it did not last long due to an unexpected event that occurred one particular weekend. On the evening of Friday, November 10, 2006, Babs went to Marcel's house as she did every week. At that time, she was unaware that Els had planned to surprise Marcel with an unexpected visit that night. Babs and Marcel had dinner together, and then they returned to Marcel's apartment. There, they found Els waiting outside the door. The content of their conversation is unknown, but it is certain that Babs did not sleep in the same bed as Marcel that night. Instead, Babs slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Els and Marcel went into the bedroom. In the living room, Babs discovered Elsa's parachute lying next to the other parachute equipment. She felt deeply hurt and betrayed that her friend had deceived and replaced her. These pent-up emotions pushed Babs to the point of committing a reckless act, leading to tragic consequences that no one could have foreseen. Then, on November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Els, Babs, and Marcel, boarded a flight over Flanders. The plan was for Els, Babs, Marcel, and another skydiver named Tom to jump in a four-person formation at an altitude of 13,000 feet. In this formation, they would link arms before releasing and deploying their parachutes. As they prepared to jump, Els, Marcel, and Tom exited the plane as planned. However, it appears that Babs, perhaps due to a delay or on purpose, jumped a little later than the others. During the free fall, Babs was unable to catch up with the group. At 9,000 feet, Marcel, Els, and Tom broke formation, preparing to deploy their parachutes safely. At this point, it was clear that something serious had occurred, as Els tried to deploy her parachute by pulling the cord, but it refused to open. Trying to stay calm, she recalled the emergency procedures from her training. Having encountered a failed parachute before, she had successfully deployed her backup parachute on that occasion. However, in this case, hurtling through free fall at around 200 kilometers per hour, she had only 20 seconds or less to make a life-saving maneuver and land successfully. Despite her efforts, pulling the backup cord proved futile, and the parachute still did not respond. As her desperation grew, she continued to pull on both the main and backup parachutes, but there was no response. Marcel, who was at an altitude of 800 meters, observed Els, who was only 500 meters above the ground, and sensed that something was wrong because her parachute had not yet deployed. However, he could do nothing but watch the horrifying scene unfold. In a last desperate attempt, Els tried to untangle her parachute cord, hoping to activate it, but her fate was sealed. Meanwhile, in the town of Upabbeek, as these events unfolded, a woman was hanging her clothes out in her garden. A loud noise suddenly made her panic. Looking up, she witnessed a woman swooping down from the sky with a parachute aimed toward her garden. This sight was not unusual, as her residence was only a few kilometers away from the parachute club and its landing site. When she turned back to continue her laundry, the woman discovered a white cloth caught in the top of her bush. Moving closer, she saw a figure lying in the bushes. She quickly called her husband, who was also in the garden doing maintenance, and they contacted emergency services. It was Els, whom they assumed was one of the parachutists, but unfortunately, she showed no signs of life. Marcel, on the other hand, had found a safe landing spot, frantically calling for Els and trying to locate her. Spotting an ambulance, he gave chase, following it to the NEA RBY location where Els had landed. When he lunged toward her, he had to be restrained to allow the rescue team to approach. When the emergency services arrived, resuscitation efforts were made, but to no avail. Els was dead. Marcel insisted on keeping Elsa's parachute intact, stating that it was unusual that neither the main nor the backup parachute had opened. He then contacted her husband, Jan, to deliver the bad news. Jan rushed to his wife's side while Tom returned to the club to relay the sad news of Elsa's death to the other members. When news of Elsa's death was revealed, Babs, feeling overwhelmed, fell to her knees and cried bitterly. Elsa's husband, Jan, arrived at the club to collect her belongings and met Babs, who offered to help him retrieve Elsa's belongings. He observed her seemingly motionless and noticed a strange smile on her face. At that moment, Babs headed toward the dressing room, with Jan following closely behind. However, upon arriving, Babs abruptly slammed the door, locking Jan out. He recounted that it took Babs quite a while before she finally emerged with Elsa's belongings. Meanwhile, at the scene of the accident, police recovered Elsa's parachute and helmet, which was equipped with a video camera that recorded her fateful jump. An autopsy conducted to determine her condition but found no traces of alcohol or drugs that could have impaired her functioning. Her death was classified as either homicide or suicide, believed to have been caused by multiple fractures and internal bleeding from the impact of the fall. Elsa's family suspected that she might have been murdered by someone in her paragliding club who knew how parachutes worked. After the police revealed that Els had been having an affair with Marcel Summers for more than 5 years, the family's grief intensified. Jan was particularly hurt when he learned that other club members, some of whom he considered friends, also knew about the relationship. Additionally, Els had provided false information to her club friends, claiming that she was divorced from her husband. Her funeral took place just 1 day before her daughter Carol's 15th birthday. During the solemn ceremony, Carol was moved to share a heartfelt message. She recalled the family's constant advice to her mother to stop parachuting. Through her story, Carol clearly expressed how much her family missed her mother. She ended her speech by acknowledging her mother's desire for privacy and emphasizing that she would not have been happy to give up her hobby. After the funeral, the police launched an investigation due to growing concerns about the failure of Elsa's backup parachute. A parachuting expert familiar with parachute mechanics was called in to examine Elsa's parachute for any flaws or irregularities. The experts quickly discovered that a crucial component was missing: the pilot's parachute, a vital part of the system. The pilot's parachute plays a key role in deploying both the main and backup parachutes. The examination revealed that her parachute had been deliberately detached, suggesting outside interference. In addition, there were clear signs of tampering, notably with the main parachute, which the pilot was responsible for deploying, and one of the slings connected to the emergency parachute. When reviewing the final body camera footage of Elsa's jump, a striking detail emerged: an unidentified piece of red fabric hovering in front of her that was not part of Elsa's parachute equipment. Investigators are having trouble determining the origin of the red object, so they asked residents of UPAB to thoroughly check their gardens and the surrounding area. If they find the object, investigators advise them to handle it with care, as it may contain DNA from the person who sabotaged Elsa's parachute. Unfortunately, people were unable to locate this important piece of evidence. After Elsa's tragic death, an unexpected event occurred on Monday. Babs found the pilot's parachute. Babs reported that she discovered the parachute when returning from Marcel's apartment and that it had been stuck in a tree along the path between UPAB and Genk. Rather than contacting the police directly, Babs chose to inform Marcel of her discovery. Upon hearing this, Marcel called the police, who quickly arrived at the scene. When the police arrived, they found Babs anxious, confused, and clearly affected by the incident. However, they were skeptical of her story when she claimed that she had discovered the parachute by accident. She explained that it was a complete coincidence and that she had simply decided to take a different route home that day instead of her usual path. According to her account, while stuck behind a slow-moving tractor, she looked up and saw a parachute hovering about 20 meters above the ground, which made her think it might be a sign from the heavens from Els. However, the police were doubtful of this story, as only the investigators knew that the parachute was missing at the time. Meanwhile, the main suspects in Elsa's murder included her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Babs. The police searched Marcel's house and concluded that he was not a suspect. They also ruled out Elsa's husband from the list of suspects. Next, the police expanded their investigation to Babs's house, where they seized many items, including Elsa's phone, laptop, and personal diary. These diaries had been recommended by a psychiatrist for Els to record her feelings. Babs was then asked to come to the police station for questioning to gather more information about her relationship with Marcel and Els, as well as to clarify the events leading up to Elsa's death. During questioning, Babs firmly denied any involvement in the destruction of Elsa's belongings. Instead, she attempted to blame Marcel, claiming that he had kept Elsa's belongings while she was at their home the previous weekend. She also accused Jan of keeping Els' belongings during the week. After the questioning, Babs was released and allowed to return home. However, a second questioning was scheduled for December 20, 2006, but Babs did not show up. Subsequent investigations revealed that she had attempted to end her own life early that morning. After taking an overdose of sleeping pills and antidepressants, she became unresponsive. Her mother rushed her to the hospital for emergency treatment. In letters written before the act, she shared with loved ones the pain of losing her best friend and the overwhelming stress of being considered the prime suspect in the murder. Babs was then admitted to a psychiatric facility for observation and treatment for 15 days. Having long been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression, this was not the first time she had attempted to harm herself. Marcel believed she was merely trying to get attention and had severed ties with her. He thought her self-harm was a ploy to distract from her role in Elsa's death, rather than a genuine desire to end her life. Els suspected she had taken medication just before her mother returned home to create a dramatic situation. He believed the police were closing in on her and that they would arrest her once they uncovered her lies. At that time, while she was receiving psychiatric treatment, Babs was arrested on January 11, 2007, on suspicion of murder. On January 19, 2007, she appeared in court and was subsequently remanded in custody while the investigation was ongoing. Babs refused to take a polygraph test despite being asked to do so. Further investigation into Els van Doren's parachute equipment revealed that the parachute cord had been deliberately cut with scissors. Based on the cut marks, it was determined that the person who cut the parachute cord was probably right-handed. By March 2007, Babs had been detained for 3 months and had undergone extensive interrogation. Despite the intense pressure, she refused to admit her guilt. During the interrogation, Babs confessed to sending an anonymous letter to Els, in which she acknowledged that her actions towards Elsa's family were wrong. However, this letter was misunderstood by Jan, who thought it was merely a criticism of Elsa's frequent absences due to her passion for parachuting. He discarded the letter without taking it seriously, but it was actually a warning that Babs intended to send to Els to end her relationship with Marcel. Additionally, Babs admitted to calling Marcel anonymously at a time when he was with Els, intending to intimidate them both. Investigators closely examined Babs's automatic activation device. Upon examination, they noticed that she jumped later than the other members of the group. However, her parachute activated earlier, allowing her to observe the events that followed from above. This strategic move also enabled her to locate Elsa's parachute, which she could retrieve later. In September 2008, Babs's lawyers successfully secured her bail, and although the case was still under investigation, she continued to work at the school. Babs's murder trial began on September 24, 2010. During the trial, the prosecution expressed confidence in the evidence they had gathered and believed there was sufficient evidence to charge her with murder. The defense argued that the murder was motivated by Babs's jealousy over her lover's relationship with her best friend. Babs had previously confessed to investigators that she knew she was second to Els in Marcel's eyes. She admitted that Marcel liked Els more than he liked her, which made her feel inferior. The prosecution suggested that her desire to eliminate her rival and remove Els from the relationship provided a plausible motive for the murder. Babs's defense attorney argued that the prosecution based their case only on circumstantial evidence and unproven claims. In her testimony, Clarence stated that she did not see a future with Marcel and that her intimacy with him was a result of her low self-esteem. She also tried to imply that Carol, Elsa's doll, Gaida might have wanted to get back at her mother for being absent most weekends. Despite her sincere efforts to persuade the jury and shift blame, the jury's verdict remained the same. On October 20, 2010, Babs, whose real name was Els Klotmans, was convicted of murdering her friend, Els van Doren, and sentenced to 30 years in prison. She later appealed, arguing that the police had questioned her without her lawyer present. In May 2011, her appeal was denied. However, in June 2022, after a third appeal and serving 12 years and 6 months, Els Clarence was granted conditional release from prison and is now free. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Neil Entwistle. Neil Entwistle was born on September 18, 1978 in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, England. His parents, Clifford and Yvonne Entwistle, raised him and his younger brother Russell in a small house. His father, Clifford, worked as a coal miner before becoming a labor consultant, and his mother, Yvonne, worked as a cook in the school canteen. After finishing high school, Neil attended York University to study electrical engineering and business management. While at the university, he met Rachel Souza, an American student studying abroad. From Kingston, Massachusetts. Rachel attended Silver Lake Regional High School and later transferred to Holy Cross College in Worcester. During her year at York University, she joined the rowing team, where she met Neil. Described as reserved and unsociable, Neil impressed his friends with his calm demeanor. Rachel, on the other hand, was outgoing, and her American background added to her charm. As a result, she was popular while on the rowing team. Neil and Rachel spent more time together, and they became closer. Neil and Rachel found themselves attracted to each other. Neil worked at a defense and security technology company in Malvern, Worcestershire. Meanwhile, Rachel pursued a career in education. After completing her studies in 2002, she became an English drama and theater teacher at St. Augustine's Catholic High School in Redditch. Neil shared a post on Friends Reunited in June 2003, joking that his job was making bombs and other things for a living. He also expressed his happiness about his upcoming wedding to Rachel, whom he called the most wonderful woman in the world. They met through sailing and formed a deep bond. Although he said he felt a little unhappy living south of the border in Birmingham, he was excited about his future with Rachel. In August 2003, the couple married in 2 ceremonies, one in Plymouth, UK and one in Massachusetts, USA. Following the ceremony in the US, they had a reception in the UK. Neil created a family website where he shares updates about their life in Worcester. The couple's daughter, Lillian Rose, was born in April 2005, leading to their decision to move to the US. They initially lived with Rachel's mother, Priscilla Matarazzo, and stepfather, Joseph, in Carver, Massachusetts, before moving to their own home in Hopkinton on January 12, 2006. Their new home, located on a quiet cul-de-sac with only 8 neighbors, offers a quiet setting just a short walk from the nearest major city. The 5-bedroom home rents for $1,500 a month, which is quite expensive. Neil, a computer programmer and IT professional, is having trouble finding work, which is causing financial stress and debt. To ease his financial burden, Neil turns to selling PC parts on eBay. However, his business is affected by customer complaints about undelivered orders, which brings in eBay's fraud investigators. During the proceedings, it is discovered that Neil has been using multiple accounts under different names. During this time, Neil runs a website called millionmaker.co.uk. The site promoted a get-rich-quick scheme targeting those in the adult entertainment industry, offering 24/7 support. The site promised a guaranteed monthly profit of $6,000 within the first 6 months. However, the site was eventually shut down. At the same time, Neil was using online platforms to find sexual partners. He visited sites such as Adult Friend Finder, Half-Price Escorts, Nightlife, and Hot Local Euro Escorts for this purpose. Neil created a profile on Adult Friend Finder and emailed several women, saying he was looking for sexual partners. Investigators found incriminating content on his laptop, including a profile in which he mentioned wanting to meet American women of various ages to confirm rumors about their sexual prowess. His profile suggested a straightforward and mutually beneficial approach to meeting like-minded people. During his trial, Neil revealed that he had searched online for blondes, suggesting that he was still interested in such services. His online searches, most recently on January 18, 2006, included terms such as Worcester Escort Services and Worcester Escorts on Google. However, Neil's actions were not simply a search for escorts and other women. Neil conducted an alarming array of online searches. He searched for terms such as knife to the throat, kill, and how to kill with a knife. These searches were interspersed with more conventional searches for employment opportunities, travel, and ways to make quick money. Additionally, during this time, Neil traveled to Carver to visit his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo. Joe was a member of the Old Colony Sporting Club in Carver. After being taught how to shoot by Joe, Neil planned to steal a gun from Joe's collection at their home in Carver, Massachusetts. He went to his parents-in-law's home, retrieved the weapon from a storage location in the home, and drove back to Hopkinton with the gun in hand. Upon returning home, he discreetly hid the gun, waiting for the opportunity to commit a tragic act of violence against his family, before ending his own life. On January 20, 2006, Neil entered the bedroom where his wife Rachel and 9-month-old daughter Lillian were sleeping. He shot Rachel, 27, in the head, then shot Lillian, who was lying next to her. The bullet passed through Lillian's body and into Rachel's left chest. That same day, while his wife's family was still at work, he returned to Carver, returning the weapon without cleaning it. After leaving Carver, Neil went to Logan Airport in Boston. That evening, January 20, 2006, he withdrew a total of $800 from an ATM in 2 transactions. However, a third attempt to withdraw an additional $420 was rejected. The next day, Saturday, January 21, 2006, Neil purchased a one-way ticket to London without luggage. At around 5 p.m., he boarded a British Airways flight, which departed from Boston at 8:15 p.m. That Saturday evening, Neil had invited some neighbors over for dinner. Joanna Gatley and her sister Maureen arrived at around 7 p.m. and found the house locked, but the lights were still on inside. Worried, they tried to call Rachel's mother, but were unable to reach her. Panicking, they decided to call 911 for assistance. The police quickly arrived at Neil's house at around 8:30 p.m. Upon entering the house, Sergeant Michael Sutton observed the scene, noticing inside the bedroom was a large, unmade bed with all the clothes piled in the middle of the bed. Except for the unmade bed, everything else in the house appeared to be in order. After completing the search, the police locked the house and left to continue patrolling. Although the police continued to search, Joanna and Maureen were still extremely worried about Rachel's family. They decided to spend the night in the car, waiting for the family to return. Despite the cold, they made several trips to the gas station bathroom during the night, anxiously waiting for any news. The next morning, Sunday, the sisters gained access to the house using the garage door code they had obtained from a neighbor the night before. When they entered the house, they found evidence that the family had just finished eating, with dishes and leftovers in the kitchen. The bathtub was still full of water, indicating that the parents had just bathed their newborn daughter. They went into the master bedroom, then to Lillian's bathroom, where classical music was playing, and finally to the living room. After Rachel's mother and stepfather arrived, they assessed the situation together and decided to report the family missing to the Hopkinton Police Department. Sergeant Michael returned to the house for a second search. This time, when he entered the basement, he noticed a strong, unpleasant odor that had not been there the day before. He followed the smell through the house until he reached the master bedroom. There, he found the bodies of Rachel and Lillian on the unmade bed, covered in clothes. Rachel's arms were stretched out across Lillian's chest, and her legs were drawn up beside her daughter. Both were wearing pajamas. An autopsy later revealed that Rachel had been shot in the head and Lillian in the torso. Further investigation found Rachel's DNA on the barrel of the gun and Neil's DNA on the stock. Neil Entwistle, 27, was initially listed as a missing person. Michael Fabry, Assistant District Attorney for Middlesex County, stated that the main priority on the first night was to find Neil as his location and condition were unknown, raising concerns for his safety. About 36 hours after returning to England, Neil visited his parents, Clifford and Yvonne. He had driven and spent the previous night at a hotel. During the visit, he told his parents that he had found the bodies of his wife and daughter. On Monday, January 23, 2006, Neil had a 2-hour telephone conversation with State Police Constable Robert Manning of the Hopkinton Police Department. The conversation was recorded and later played back in full during the court proceedings. Neil explained that after finding the bodies, he became extremely frightened and quickly went to his family. He told police that he had covered the bodies with sheets and then thought of the knives in the house. He picked up a large knife and stabbed himself, but was too afraid of the pain to use it. Neil appeared confused as to why he did not call an ambulance. Neil could not bring himself to use a knife to harm himself. He told police that he then drove the family car to his father-in-law Joe Matarazzo's house to retrieve a .22 LR revolver. However, he found the house locked. Rather than explore other options, Neil decided to fly back to England to stay with his parents. On January 26, 2006, U.S. police arrived in the UK to question Neil. The following day, January 27th, after speaking to a lawyer at his parents' home, Neil refused to meet with U.S. police at the U.S. Embassy in London. Rachel and her daughter Lillian were buried at Evergreen Cemetery in Kingston, Massachusetts, under the surname Souza. They were buried together in a coffin. About 500 people attended the funeral, but Neil was absent. His name was not mentioned at the service and is not inscribed on their joint headstone. Instead, Neil sent a bouquet of flowers consisting of an orange rose and a white lily with a note attached to a ribbon. The note read, "My orange roses and lilies forever," and was signed Sakoko. Upon his return to England, Neil appeared to have returned to his usual routine. In February 2006, despite the constant media attention outside his parents' home in Waltham, he attended a dinner in Notting Hill with his old crew from York University. About a week after Rachel and Lillian's funerals, he also went to the movies. On February 8, 2006, the Middlesex District Attorney's Office issued a warrant for Neil's arrest. The following day, Neil was arrested by London's Metropolitan Police at Royal Oak Station as he prepared to board a train. At the time of his arrest, Neil had a notebook in which he planned to sell his story to the highest bidder. The notebook also included affectionate notes about his orange rose and a person named Lily. Neil referred to his wife as "my dearest and most beloved friend" in the notebook. He also wrote 2 letters to the editor sharing his story and had contacted a close friend about his plans. In one of the letters, Neil asked about the amount of money he might receive for sharing his entire story exclusively. Neil chose not to contest the extradition order. On February 15, he was returned to the United States and appeared in Framingham County Court. The court ordered him held without bail at the Middlesex County Jail in Cambridge, Massachusetts. On March 28, 2006, Neil was formally charged with 2 counts of murder, as well as illegal possession of a firearm and ammunition. He pleaded not guilty to these charges. In December 2006, nearly a year after the tragic incident, Middlesex County Jail police found letters Neil had written to his parents and attorney. The letters revealed his struggles with depression and hinted that he may have been thinking about ending his life. As a result, he was temporarily transferred to Bridgewater Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation before being returned to Middlesex County Jail. Forensic psychiatrist Christopher Cordless believed that Neil's behavior was the result of Asperger's syndrome, a view also shared by Dr. David Holmes. After several delays, jury selection for the trial in Middlesex Superior Court began in June 2008. Concerns arose over the high-profile nature of the case and whether Neil would receive a fair trial. The trial officially began on June 2, 2008, in Wrentham, Massachusetts. Elliot Weinstein led Neil's defense team. During the trial, Weinstein attempted to block the prosecution from using DNA evidence, but was unsuccessful. He also attempted to exclude other evidence found in the family home because the police did not have a warrant, but this effort was also unsuccessful. Neil chose not to call any witnesses or testify in his own defense. Those who attended the trial noted that Neil showed little emotion throughout the trial. On June 25, 2008, Neil Entwistle was convicted of first-degree murder, as well as possession of a firearm and ammunition without a license. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, Neil told family and friends in court not to worry, saying, "I'll be fine." He was initially sent to the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center. However, in August 2008, Neil shaved his head, thinking it would protect him from a white supremacist gang in prison. But instead of protecting him, the gang said they would kill him and viewed his actions as a futile attempt to gain their favor. As a result, Neil was transferred to protective custody for his own safety. Then, in December, Neil was transferred to the Old Colony Correctional Center, a medium-security prison in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. The transfer was made for his own safety due to threats against his life, according to the Department of Corrections. The deaths of Rachel and her infant daughter had a profound impact on their family and friends. In the wake of the loss, the community rallied to offer support and comfort to her grieving family. The story of Neil Entwistle and Rachel Sousa is a heartbreaking reminder that even people who appear to have perfect lives can be hiding difficulties. Hopefully, the stories of Rachel and her daughter will help us to stay vigilant and to cherish the time we have with our loved ones.